Century Saints this fine Wednesday evening. It is Wednesday, the 4th of August, 2021. I had to think
Ooh.
there if it was 2021. Eh,
I keep
and
forgetting my age.
oh, listen. So tonight, if you have seen our posts, you will know that we have Peter Bleakley with us again. But this time, for a very different reason, we are here to talk about his membership council this time, which went ahead. And if you've seen Nemo's podcast of the night, he did talk about it, but we have loads more questions.
Oh, yeah.
Loads more questions.
Oh, yeah, because everybody has questions, like people want to know stuff, not that we're nosy, but, well, coincidentally, I am nosy. So will we just jump right in and get the question started?
Why not? Let's go for it.
Okay. So keeping in mind we get new viewers all the time, and new people are coming into this space. So why don't we just start with a kind of just briefly bring us up to what brought you to this point? What have you been up to, Peter? What's been going on?
Well, me and my big mouth, So, so I've basically that. I think I've always been in the past an apologist for the church or a defender of it, but also a friendly critic. I was reflecting today, actually, my upbringing in the church was with parents totally devoted, serving all their lives, and just full on doing the business, serving in the church, building it, leading. But the gift that they gave me, in a sense, was they were also able to do critical analysis. We'd go to church, do church, then come home, and it'd be, right, what went wrong today? And how are we going to fix it? So it was never everyone else's fault or everyone else's responsibility. It's always this can-do attitude of how can we do better? How can we better reflect the gospel and what this church should be about?
Just going to jump in quickly, if that's okay. I feel a bit like John Dillon here, but I'm kind of, as I've listened to all his podcasts, I'm like, I need to know this. Were you quite orthodox? Like, did you do the whole family prayer, family scripture study, family home evening, all the things?
Yeah, well, I mean, and the good thing is they weren't ludicrously fanatical about it, and we were uncooperative a lot of the time, so it wasn't their fault. So we didn't get up at 6 a.m. and do scripture study. Yeah. That was never going to fly. But we did family home evening. We attended all our meetings. It was just a given. Their example was we always go to everything at church. We care about it. We study, but it was light touch enough not to be oppressive. I think a lot of my friends who grew up in the church with parents who are really strictly doing the business, like interviewing your children every month formally, and the nonsense we got told in the 70s and 80s to do. And, the family that prays together stays together, especially if you get them up at 6 o'clock in the morning and read the Book of Mormon for half an hour. Most of my friends who went through that ended up just running away from it the first second they could. It alienated them because it made the religion this strict, ritualistic, oppressive thing ruining your life. So my parents were genius, really, in reflection. I would have died rather than tell that to them as a teenager, of course. But they were brilliant, and they got the balance really right, I think. So we did it, but not oppressively, and we were flexible where we needed to be. Yeah. So I grew up in that household, but with this amazing extra element of it's our responsibility if things aren't great. The church is a work in progress, just as we are. Yeah. And we have to, it's our job to make it better. And they were really building from scratch. They met at Brigham Young University as British students, had me, came back. So when they walked into Tunbridge Wells branch meeting in Schofields Community Centre, as everyone was sweeping up the beer and the cigarette butts from the party the night before on the estate, for sacrament meeting. So literally, as I said before, the smell of stale beer and cigarette ash actually makes me nostalgic for sacrament meeting. I mean, I'm not even kidding. That's the smell of church in my childhood. And they said, oh, hello, we just come from BYU. And someone said, oh, good, we need a new branch president. So my dad was branch president in moments, and then, they're in leadership ever since. But what they brought was they'd been to Utah in the early 70s and seen the vision. They'd seen how the church can be. And here in Britain, in most places, we were just still little twigs trying to start functioning with a ragtag bunch of complete nut jobs. I mean, it's still, you know, pretty much that, isn't it? But and so they were bringing, in a sense, their experience and some professionalism to the whole enterprise, but always with this idea that we can keep getting better, you know. So that's kind of a mental state I've grown up in. And I think what triggered me into becoming quite a dissident or a vocal critic of the leadership of the church and some of the things they're doing and teaching is I started to see, really over the last 20 years, the radical decline that we've talked about. People leaving the church. People have been in the church for decades, served faithfully, loved it, raised their children in this religion, leaving over this thing, church history, or disillusionment, faith crisis, trust what's going on. And then the kids leaving, you know, the whole model we were promised as a people by the prophets in the 70s and 80s was, if you do everything really super pharisaically strictly, you know, don't let your daughters have 2 earrings, do the family scripture thing, all of this, send them on missions, they will all marry in the temple, they will stay faithful for life, you've set a foundation in their lives, and you are going to have a lovely brood of Mormon grandchildren that you will go to their temple weddings and everything will be lovely, and you take all that to heaven with you.
Doesn't that sound a bit like a fairy tale?
It does, but we kept being given role models who were doing it.
Yep.
You know, obviously hardly anyone in Britain even came close to that. A few families sort of managed it, but it all the time, the propaganda, it's in the ensign. Here's another perfect Utah family. Here's another you know, it's all going well for them. And here's the general authority with their 12 children who've all married in the temple, and it's all going great. You know, what we find later is, well, of course it is. We're paying for it. They got free Brigham Young University because our tithing paid for that, and so on. You know, we made it easy for them. But you know, you only find that out later. But we were not getting the outcome, and suddenly the kids are leaving, and nearly all the kids are leaving, and then information starts to leak onto the internet. And from the 1990s onwards, particularly into the 2000s, the Bloganacle, the Mormon internet really got going. And we're suddenly being given information, and information is power. And we're learning that the version of history that we were taught, even on a most basic level, had wild inaccuracies in it. And here's the original documents. We're learning that the church has taken a fortune from the members in tithes and offerings and invested it in the stock market, and now has a commercial empire amounting to $300 billion. The Catholic Church has half that, you know, in total, probably. And there's over 1 billion of them. There's like, we're tiny compared to them. How come we've got all this money? And the leaders are being paid. We were told we didn't have a paid clergy. Oh, it turns out that if you're a general authority or a mission president, you get 140 grand a year plus lots of expenses. And it's one hit after another, one scandal, one disillusionment, one this is not what you told us after another. And that takes its toll. And then people start investigating these things in a bit more detail. And the metaphor a lot of people use is Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole into what seems like the same world they're in, but everything has changed. Suddenly it's Alice in Wonderland.
You say, I'm interested when you said it takes its toll.
Yeah.
So while we tend to speak broadly about the numbers of people who are not here, the distress that's caused in families when mixed faith you know, issues start to appear. Talk to me about that toll for you, because you could have found out all of this stuff like most members of the church in the world, never mind the UK, and you could have just shut up and you could have just focused on, you know, well, how can I make things better? What's my part? Tell me, what's the toll?
So the toll is, I think some of the early situations is people I grew up with just not sticking with the gospel, you know, and even coming back from missions and then leaving. So that's the first thing. So in my early 20s, at least half of my peer group, and we were very lucky. We had a a great tight-knit group. We're kind of the first in our little area that kind of made it through the whole system. We did seminary, we did institute, we traveled miles to all the dances and the conventions, and we love each other dearly. Great, you know, bunch of people, and most of us went on missions. But after that, a few didn't make it that far, but most of us did. And after that, though, one after another, people are kind of dropping off. A lot have stayed, you know, they're still hanging in there, but their children haven't. And so you start to lose good friends who just become disillusioned with the church for various reasons. In one case, it was having a really terrible experience with the temple, and that sort of started a spiral. In others, it just might be never really feeling the spirit and always being told you have to have this burning in the bosom and this certainty. And we didn't model a way to be an active, faithful Mormon progressing forward without that experience. So one of my dear friends just kind of never happened for him. So he never felt he fitted. You know, these things, if you could go back in time, immediately LGBTQ, you know, at least 2 of my peer group were gay. So they just disappeared. We had no idea how to frame that or what to do with it then. You know, now we're much more aware and in tune. But then it was just completely unspeakable. You couldn't even begin to imagine. And they're obviously, they couldn't possibly have a place in a church where President Kimball was calling these evil perverts dangers to humanity, you know, and it's all their own fault and a sinful choice. And that actually became a further issue. So the missionary companion of my dad, who'd kind of was gay, but suppressed it all, married, had lots of children, left his family. And that was quite traumatic. My MTC companion, and I served with him later on my mission, absolutely campus Christmas, you know, gay to the max. He, you know, couple of years after his mission, he finally came out and just couldn't be in it anymore. I mean, he's just a wonderful guy, and he lives in the heartland of Utah, you know, but he's found a safe home in the Presbyterian church there. And, you know, he has a spiritual home now, which is lovely, that's inclusive. And then kids I'm teaching in primary are gay and clearly were from a very young age and can't stay to be safe. And then people I've served with in senior callings having the same experience, coming out, their family disintegrating, the awful impact of that. And all of them were set up for this by the church, particularly the ones that got married. The church told them, get married to cure yourself. This was church policy and guidance, and even hiding that from the spouses in a lot of cases. You know, don't tell them, this will just fix you. Particularly in America and Utah, that was there's the unspoken pressure to do that anywhere in the church, but you know, direct advice from leaders in Utah to people, which everyone's talked about since, you know. So there's that carnage that my dear friends, people I've served mission with, are just being thrown away or can't be safe in this church. And particularly, I was quite involved in being an apologist, you know, defending the church. Particularly at university, Doug, and particularly at university, where I got involved in a really fascinating situation. I was involved with the Christian Union, and my buddy Steve, who was in the year above me, was one of the Christian Union leadership. The other Christian Union people had an anti-cult campaigner come through town and decided I was verboten and must not be allowed to pray in Christian Union meetings. My friend Steve thought that was outrageous because Christian Union isn't a religion. You know, you can't discipline people. Effectively, I was being disfellowshipped or whatever, you know. You can be here, but don't pray and don't worship with us. And my friend Steve thought that was ridiculous, but he wanted to investigate, well, are Mormons Christians? And he got hold of every anti-Mormon book there he could get hold of. This was just before the internet took off, so really early 90s. And we spent a year or two having really long discussions just based on anti-Mormon literature. And he discovered through that, and I discovered through that, we have an incredible religion here. Even our weird stuff that we get criticized for is actually robust, interesting, and offers things that Christianity, mainstream Christianity, doesn't have. And he eventually joined the church. He's still a member, bless his heart. And he's you know, served a mission and everything.
No,
But sorry, just while I was doing that though, I was very conscious, having been fully exposed to these criticisms of the church and critiques. I was like, there's a lot of stuff here that we've not prepared our own members for.
Yeah.
We are wasting the fat years. We're not a persecuted people anymore. We were in the 1970s, and I was experiencing that mild persecution at uni. You know, there's still that there within the Christian world, but hardly anyone goes to church anymore. So no one cares. Like, if we're apostates, doesn't matter. So I really had this strong sense that we are wasting the good years. We need now to get our people up to date. We need to prepare them that there's a different version of our history, that there are valid criticisms of our church, and we need to teach our people so they can cope with it, because you do not want them being exposed to the stuff I've just been wading through in a time of crisis under pressure. And it became very clear that the church was not preparing its members. It was sticking, because it was easy and they were getting away with it, we'll stick with McConkie Mormonism and not worry anyone. And then the internet came and blew all of that up, because it's like, here in everyone's face is all of this information that I took years to process, a small piece at a time. Here it is all at once. That's not going to go well.
Really fascinates me about your experiences up till this point is that you have had nothing but, more or less nothing but positivity that's come from discussion. So, going to church, can we be better? I would say it's a very Mormon thing to experience life and think, I need to act, this is on me. I'm the person who it's all gonna, my salvation rests with me. I need to be active and fixing and doing. So I like that. And if you carry that approach through your life, if you're having these experiences in university, that it's stimulating, it's interesting, it's not necessarily threatening, it's not contentious, certainly. It's really interesting. So
it's all a win for the church. Everything's going the church's way, I can engage in a dialogue with an amazing spiritual giant Christian. I mean, Steve is better than any of us. He was just already very humble, very, deep-rooted Christian to his core. And yet still I found I could offer him something. We've got something more. We've got things that he didn't feel he had in his evangelical Christianity. I mean, that's astonishing. It's so reaffirming. We're great. We've got all the answers, Jane. Isn't it wonderful? We are sorted. We can win any battle. Yeah.
Like we go out into the world. We know we've got all of this truth. Of course, the world is going to be converted. What interests me is that you weren't threatened. And so because that isn't a given. That's not a typical thing. Often we are defensive and we're worried. And when something challenges it, we can get very, well, it doesn't end well often.
No.
We're not trained in how to do it.
So here's the difference, I think, because what I wasn't coming up against was what we know now. So it was since then that we found the really dangerous stuff, I would say, or the really unsettling stuff. It was after this that we found out the first vision might not have even happened. Joseph said nothing about it till 1832. Like, the whole church started with no one mentioning the first vision as he later described it. And then there's these different accounts. And then Joseph Fielding Smith hid the first account, the 1832 account of the first vision, in his safe for 30 years because it only mentioned one personage, not two. It contradicts the one we recited on our missions. And then there's more and more. And what really went on with polygamy, and Joseph Smith was a polygamist, and he was quite a predatory polygamist. He married people's wives while they were off on their missions. So I was not dealing with any of that.
Yeah.
So what the level that the anti-Mormon literature I was dealing with was mostly inaccurate. So that was easy to refute. And it only lightly touched on some of these other issues. So what we're dealing with now is kryptonite compared to that.
I do.
We're now dealing with shocking stuff that's really difficult to process. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Although what we tend to do is we tend to very quickly put a question. If someone has questions or concerns, we will make decisions or assessments on what their tone is, what their motivation is, and then we'll sort of, respond based on that. You clearly don't want any answers. You just want to be confrontational. And so I'm going to be threatened. But what I really want to do is to encourage our audience, if you want to know the details of what Peter has been saying, that we'll talk about your podcast details and how the audience can watch it. We have spoken before on one of our episodes also, with Nemo just recently, you covered a lot of what has been happening. So how you've been feeling about church and how you're experiencing it, you would go to church and not stay silent, right? You're commenting, you're questioning.
Yeah.
Maybe?
So what really, from this realization I had at university, that we're not educating our own people, we're not inoculating them, we're not introducing them to the difficult stuff so they hear it at church first. I was as I got informed, I wanted to share that knowledge. I wanted to start inoculating. And I had lots of opportunities to do so. I was Elders Quorum president. I'm teaching Elders Quorum lessons. I was gospel doctrine teacher repeatedly. And as a professional teacher, I'm very easy as a stand-in. I can teach a lesson with 5 minutes notice and it will sort of go okay, because that's my day job. It's not a shock to my system. And I'm giving talks. So I was getting lots of opportunities to gradually introduce some of the more nuanced stuff and the real history. And then the church started making an effort for this. They realized they were losing people over what they were finding out online. So we had these moments. So as we discussed before, there was 2012 was incredible. It's the Mormon moment. Mitt Romney has just swept in and saved the Salt Lake City Olympics, which were turning into a disaster of financial corruption. He kicked butt. They ended up being a huge success. On the back of that, he made a run for president. He became a Republican candidate for the president of the USA. The church was like, hurrah, we're going to have a Mormon president. And he was in with a chance. But then reality hit. The press arrive in Salt Lake City and they have they set up LDS newsroom to kind of deal with the media and engage for once. And the press are, of course, asking perfectly reasonable questions. What's with your racism? What was going on with the racist history of the church? And they interview Randy Bott, with one of the best names in Mormonism, who was a kind of very popular but not very up-to-date sort of religion teacher at BYU. And he just trotted off all the old justifications that were given for racism, the curse of Cain, black people being, second-class citizens, not allowed the priesthood, and so on. And that went into a Washington Post newspaper article. Church was very embarrassed, and the media, the LDS newsroom, who ended up having this nickname President Newsroom, because President Newsroom would tell the press the things that our own leaders were not telling us, issued this statement, quite just a couple of paragraphs in 2012, that was one of the greatest moments of my life. And for the first time, they said, we disavow, the word disavow, all racism in and outside the church, past and present. And they'd ended racist segregation in 1978, but they'd never disavowed the doctrines. They'd never said this is not what God wanted. They just said now is the time. God's changed his mind, So this was the first time, and I'd served a mission in Alabama, which is half black, just tears, I know we talked earlier, I don't cry enough for you. I came close to tears reading that. Because this was the moment, at last, they're going to dump the racism as a concept. Daniel Oakes has brought it back since, of course, which we can discuss another time. And then they issued the Gospel Topics essays, which were in a sense a response to this media attention, but also the need of the members for better information. And they're
but no one knows about them.
But no one knows about them. So in 2013, polygamy, the different First Vision accounts, the Book of Abraham and how it's translated, the translation of the Book of Mormon with the seer stone in the hat. And then they put the seer stone in the ensign. Like in the Ensign, the mythical seer stone, this thing I read about in all this anti-Mormon literature, and the church was flat out denying was how Joseph Smith ever translated the Book of Mormon.
Well,
here it is in the Ensign. Yeah.
What I would point out is the fact that, first of all, I realized at that moment, that one moment, I realized at that time that loads of people that I assumed were showing up, reading materials, reading the Ensign, keeping an eye on what's happening. We go to church and we talk about how our faith is everything. Had no clue, and I couldn't understand why that's the case, other than you're just not reading it. So if I'm the person who's reading it, then and I'm finding this so exciting. This is huge.
It's like politics. It's news, isn't it? Mormon news happening in front of us.
So what we want to do actually is we want to talk about that. So the church is disavowing something. That means it's sort of giving me permission to show up on a Sunday and start talking about some of these things, testing the waters. I'll kind of look at how we're going to do it, but it means I can start to open my mouth. So you start to open your mouth anyway. You start to introduce how's it going now?
And so I'm and it came a bit later, more where I was, and Elder Ballard told the CES, you got to stop telling faith promoting stories, just in 2015 or so. And he said, teach the real history, know the gospel topics like the back of your hand. And that whole sermon he gave to the CES is in the December 2016 Ensign. I just sent a link to it to someone today. And you can read it, although they edited one thing which reveals volumes. He said, know the gospel topics essays like the back of your hand. They edited it to know the gospel topics well.
I've heard the church are quite good at editing things out of talks and things over the years.
I mean, the paranoia, and it's a long talk and it's all in there. So this is the one tiny thing they didn't need to edit. Why is knowing the gospel topics like essays like the back of your hand too much for the members of the church, but knowing them well is okay? Like the paranoia involved in that kind of decision making, it just speaks volumes. There's these little windows into their stress that they go on through at the church office building. But I was rejoicing. I was like, yes, this is what I've been saying all along. We need to teach people. He used the word inoculation, so I'm doing it. I'm teaching it in my lessons. Here's some of the history. I was still learning it myself. I'll make a comment if they're about to teach something false, I'll say so. So I had this amazing experience in Poor Hastings Ward, which I think traumatized the teacher, where I was visiting there because it's where my wife's from. And they were about to have a lesson about the 1978, priesthood change, letting black people have the priesthood. And it very quickly became clear that nobody in that room, including the teacher, was aware that the church had now disavowed this stuff. So he was about to teach in the 21st century the standard line that the reason black people couldn't have the priesthood was the curse of Cain, and this was all God's will, and so on. And I know, so I interrupted. I said, great news, everybody. They've issued this statement, and there's a gospel topic essay about it, and they've repudiated all of the racism. And it's like wonderful. I got to be the person telling a whole congregation this great news. We're not racist anymore. I mean, the best thing ever. But because I took 5 minutes doing it, and it's making some people uncomfortable because they've never heard this before, one of the sisters kind of told me to shut up, and I need to stop now. And the teacher got traumatized that I'd kind of hijacked his lesson. And that really impacted him afterwards. I'm so sorry that happens, But that's just that's the clash, isn't it? We've got the McConkie Mormonism mindset that is just all they want is to keep hearing what they were told in primary repeated on a loop because they find it reassuring. And the church has moved on spectacularly. So I'm a teacher. I mean, it's my profession. So I want to teach people. So I'm putting things in Facebook posts. I'm saying it in the lesson, and it's making people uncomfortable because they've not. Usually,
it's exciting. It's
Yes.
truth. It's stuff
Yes.
from the church's website. Now, I have to say, I feel like this is an episode where I'm probably going to have my active believing Mormon hat on a little bit more, or at least sort of play
go for it,
that
'cause
advocate kind of side, because often we hear a lot that no one knows that the essays exist, now, or that the church is sort of hiding them. They are not that blooming well hidden. I mean, they're they're there if you have any interest in being a member of the church.
Yeah, but in my defense, I have to say, I don't really look anywhere else other than like the scriptures and the manuals. Like I personally wouldn't go digging around to see what else was there. So that could be the same for a lot of other people.
I think that's exactly what it is. So when information is presented to you, that you should surely, I mean, do we believe our own stuff? Are we, we don't get to stand and preach about how educated we are in the gospel if we're not using the resource. Like, I feel like if you're a member of the church and how many years of the gospel topics essays been out now?
2013. I'm good. I remembered that.
Years. Like, they've not been out for 6 weeks and you've just not kept. I mean, years, and you remember the church.
And this is something I brought up. And this is something I brought up at my membership trial, which we'll get to, in a moment. But so here's the, and they have been mentioned occasionally in general conference even. But here's the thing. I mean, there is an intent, we probably talked about this before, but there is an intentional plan here. The plan of the leaders is that the older members who are taught McConkie Mormonism will never hear about the essays. They just need to die, get old and die, and never have their McConkie Mormonism rocked. Meanwhile, they are teaching them to the kids. The gospel topics essays are being used in seminary and institute.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the kids are being taught the new curriculum, and their game plan is not to have to save themselves grief, to save having to say, "Oh, we're sorry, we lied to you, and we apologize," which they will never do. They just want it to gradually filter through and percolate. And they can always say, "Oh, those have been online for decades. Have you not? It's your fault you've not come across them."
Exactly.
But the essays have never been published in the Ensign or the Liahona. They've not been put where the average members are going to find them. They've just been mentioned enough for plausible deniability. They've not been integrated into the manuals for the mainstream curriculum for gospel doctrine. A few bits of them are getting through. They're there, and the Joseph Smith Papers Project stuff in the Gospel Library app. If you go 2 layers in, it's all there. But how many people do that? As Alana said, you don't.
You're right.
We're
you're
too busy.
Right.
We don't get we don't know they're there to look for.
Yeah. Well, because what we do, I'm aware we're getting caught in the weeds a bit here, and I want you, Peter, if you wouldn't mind, as we're talking this, if you could address Debbie's comment about the word inoculate being problematic. I totally agree. But what I would say is the seer stones were in the Ensign. People aren't reading the Ensign. People are lazy.
I know. Do you know what? The number of
church and we switch off. No, we literally have to be spoon fed, and that is on you. Yeah. That is on the person who's actively choosing not to. And I get really mad when it's like,
calm down, Hen. Calm down. Can we just backtrack to the word inoculate?
Yeah, well, but
so that I know what it means.
I use now is if you want to hide something in plain sight, do a massive Ensign article about it. Put it on the cover. I think the seer stone was on the cover of the Ensign, it was on the cover. So just, you can hide it in plain sight by, as you said. So it does in Mormonism, people are trained to be spoon fed. So if you want them to actually understand something, you will spoon feed it to them if you want them to know. But they don't want the adults to know. And most of the adults still don't know this stuff. And we still got converts who never did seminary. So they don't even know seminary level stuff from the past. All they know is what the missionaries taught them and what the manuals have taught them in gospel doctrine. That's it. So they have a car crash when they encounter the full scale of this different history.
Yeah, so let's talk about inoculation then.
Yeah, so to inoculate means it's a way of getting people protected against disease, in an inoculation, you give them a less dangerous version of a virus. So it won't kill them. It's like a milder version, and you give them a small dose so they get used to it and their body learns to have defenses. So to inoculate people, which is the word that Elder Ballard used regarding what's in the essays, is you have to drip feed it into their lessons. You have to take a little bit at a time, tell them about it, let them get used to the idea, give them some framing, and then you go to the next bit. Whereas what tends to happen is people get online, start asking difficult questions, do a weekend of Googling, and their whole testimony is destroyed by next Tuesday. Loads of people have had that happen because of so much. They find it all at once. They don't deal with it a piece at a time. And what I feel I had to offer was I started dealing with this as a teenager because I was a bit nerdy. And then these experiences at university, literally spending hours and hours a week with anti-Mormon literature. And I've been able to slowly be inoculated. I've bit by bit coped with this and reframed and adjusted my religion to handle it. But the problem is today, the church membership is crashing so fast. We don't have years for it anymore, which is why I tend to splurge a bit. I'm like, okay, guys, we're in a war zone now, and it's the last bit of the war. So I'm going to tell you a lot of these things you've never heard of before. They are difficult, but I'm one of the few people you're going to meet who wants you to stay in the church. I'm going to say the punchline always is, this is difficult, but we can do this. Mormonism can survive this. Here's how we reframe and adjust. And it's not just me. There are a lot of people trying to stay in the church doing that. They become nuanced Mormons. So that's the journey I kind of went on. But then I started then I'd say what really tipped me into being more aggressive and more assertive as a dissident voice and posting things on my Facebook that do come across as just critical, is the scandals started happening. It started to become very clear. Debbie's pointing out there that inoculate can also be used as a form of mind control and manipulation. And that's what this is. If you believe that, the lies they've been telling you is, or the new version isn't accurate as well, you can use that system to manipulate people for evil.
And
but we'll assume it's moving. Sorry, go on.
It's also worth saying that, whenever we had mentioned it in terms of disease, a less toxic version of a disease.
Yes.
Quite often what's happened is you're given a version of something where I can then look at the seer stones and think, oh yeah, I know all about that. So an inoculation is not necessarily we are educating or we're learning or we're getting all the information. It's introducing subjects that are
that you can then learn more about later, and I think that's fair enough, but at least you heard it at church first. But the problem is what they've done is they think the gospel topics deal with the whole thing. A lot of the general authorities think they've solved the problem, but they don't. They open a Pandora's box. They open wounds. They admit that the McConkie Mormonism you were taught was a lie. And they just blatantly admit thing after thing that in the past the leaders of the church said was anti-Mormon lies. They basically say, no, that was true. Actually, that was true. That's true as well. And then almost the whole list of things that used to be denied is true. And then there's nothing. You read that, and you might click on a few of the others, and you suddenly dealt with all the polygamy stuff, all the Book of Abraham stuff, all the First Vision stuff, all the blacks and the priesthood stuff. And that is overwhelming. It took me months, years to process that gradually. And then there's no safety net. There is no pastoral care. So, for example, I brought this up. We had Elder Sabin, who's lovely, American guy, very thoughtful, came and in the area presidency still, I think, or was, came and sort of rejigged our state leadership. And in an adult training session, I brought up, the issue that we've got a lot of people in faith crisis, and can we do more to support them and introduce them to these issues and train them better? This was a couple of years ago. And afterwards, he just kind of bumped into me in the corridor, thanked me for my comments. And he said, do you know about the gospel topics essays? And I said, yes, I do. They're great, but They're not enough on themselves. We have no pastoral support for helping people to cope with the implications of them, to cope with the impacts that has, to process the fact they've just found out the church lied to you all your life about really big stuff. And he just looked perplexed, and he obviously was busy and had to go somewhere. But, and I may be reading too much into it, but I just got a real sense in that moment he'd never thought of that.
Yeah.
And that the leadership do not realize, they think they delegated this to the historians. Oh, these people have got issues about the history. We'll get some historians to write some essays. We'll neuter them. We'll take out most of the juicy stuff so we make it more friendly that we can stand it. And that's it. And just read the gospel topics essays. You'll be fixed. They have no idea they've unleashed a minefield of truth bombs. And everyone who walks into it blows up. And very few of them stay in the church.
So, Peter, if all of the information, as much as it's out there, whether it's hidden, whether people are accessing it or not, you could just let them get on with it and enjoy church how people are enjoying it.
Yeah.
Why are you speaking up when some people are clearly getting rattled?
Yes. Well, and I'm taking them out of their comfort zone. And here's why. Because if they don't, we have no ward in 5 years. My ward's on the extreme edge of all this. We're down to 40 members usually, and I think there are about 10 there on Sunday. So, and I'm also looking at, and part of the reason they're getting more rattled now is the more nuanced members, the more informed, the people who are not so rigid in their thinking, who used to be in the room, sometimes teaching the lesson in my ward, they've left the church now.
They're leaving, yeah.
So they've gone, the people. So what you're left with increasingly is the people who've never questioned this and don't want to. So they become the majority in the room, and they're far more sensitive to being upset by this. So each year that goes on, there's fewer and fewer people present who can cope with this. Yet what the church needs is everyone to step up and cope with it and make this the curriculum and reform. So it's this, like the water's going into the bath, but it's going right out the plug at the same time. And
So
then
if
I'm
you-
becoming seen as more and more of a threat because they're less and less able to cope. And there've been a few incidents which were brought up, by implication at my trial, where I've talked about things about Joseph Smith that were basic to seminary lessons, nothing short, not even gospel topics level stuff. But there were experienced older members in the room who were really upset by what I was saying and felt I was being unnecessarily controversial because they don't know it. They have no idea about this history.
And so what if you stick with your sphere of influence? You're in your ward, you're in your stake, and you can be the person to speak up. If I'm a member in your ward, you're someone I could clearly have conversations with you about or questions, or we could, why are you taking it to Facebook? Why are you starting a podcast?
So what if and in that I'm calling out the leadership of the church and the whole system. The reason is they're the cause of the problem. They ultimately, it all goes back to them, and they have the power to change it as well for the better. I mean, they won't. We'll have to force them, probably, the way things usually go. But it all comes from them, and on all of these issues. So going back to my LGBTQ friends, the rhetoric from Dallin Oakes and other leaders of the church is relentlessly homophobic, has been appalling and still is. And they're the people who need to shape up and behave heterosexually, or they can just go to a lower kingdom. And Dallin Oakes has taught in General Conference that the church is here for the heterosexual nuclear families, going to follow their pattern. And anyone who doesn't qualify for that, God has made other kingdoms for thee. He's washed his hands of them. His view is our church doesn't have any duty of care to anyone who doesn't fit that model, which is rejecting all the single people, the LGBTQ people, all kinds of swathes of people. And that is from the leadership. And that's why people are leaving. They listen to that and they hate it and they go.
Okay, so the church's duty of care, the church is starting to produce podcasts, and it is doing the essays. There are things that are happening. So why is your podcast needed? Why do you have to be the person to do it? And why do you have to use language that you know they are going to really struggle with.
Yeah,
because you're a rebel.
There is that, and it's the I'd say it's the British fighter in me, but British people do not tolerate crap, and we particularly get nauseated by American schmaltz. The American, it's part of their culture to be really cheesy, to be hyper vigilant about language, to speak everything gently and softly, particularly in the church, and it's a way of passive aggressive mind control. So part of rebelling against that whole system is to just say things as they are. So I will say, you are a liar. And then I'll quote the apostle lying. And then the other apostle lying, and 3 more apostles lying, and the manual lying, and the thing they wrote in that lying, therefore you're a liar. And to empower ourselves with truth, we have to be able to say the word, because this is what George Orwell taught in 1984. The language controls the mind, the thoughts. If you take away the word freedom or democracy, it's hard to think of freedom or democracy as a concept. If we are going to have to hold our leaders accountable, which they won't let us do anymore, but we used to be told all the time they're accountable to us in common consent, then if they are doing something bad, we have to be able to say what it is and be honest about that. If only because loads of people are saying it and leaving the church. Like, we have to talk to those people. We have to speak to their anger, their outrage, their pain. If they don't hear me saying, yes, you're right, these people lied to us, they are liars, they're not going to take us seriously, because they've found out already that these people are liars. And if we're in denial and we can't say the word because they're the Lord's anointed, we're stuffed. We have no credibility.
Yeah.
And then half of us saying that are then going to go online and find out they were lying. And we have to reframe our whole religion and our expectations to cope with imperfect leaders, which should be fine in Christianity.
I want to talk about that point a little bit later on also. So take us up to the point where, I mean, you're having great results, the feedback that you're getting. I mean, your podcast work is, I rarely go on chat on a podcast episode, and I'm not seeing people talking about your work, about Douglas's work. It is huge, and we're not talking about people who are disaffected from church, although of course they're watching. We're talking about everyone. The impact is huge, and really great things are being said. We're having conversations that are exciting and they're positive, and painful. So you then are called for disciplinary. I'm using the term disciplinary. You're called for a church membership council.
A court of love.
Did you see the eye roll there?
So this is part of this Orwellianness with the language. They've changed the words for things to pretend they're not as bad as they are. So disfellowshipment is now membership restrictions. I don't know what the old official name was. Maybe it was always a membership council, but a trial, a disciplinary council, it probably used to be called. And excommunication is now membership withdrawal, as if it's a golf club, rather than like taking away all your covenants and condemning you to outer darkness.
Well, hold on to that thought, because we want to come back and talk about the terminology around it. But you get. I mean, it had been in the water. You and your state president.
So I started. So as part of this. And as I said, the scandals started happening. I particularly had an experience with the 2015 November policy. Obviously, it was completely wrong. It contradicts half the articles of faith. It rocked tens of thousands of members' testimonies. Thousands left the church. Loads of them started to be disillusioned from that point, because it was the most overt, blatant example that, okay, it looked like we were getting better. We're starting to be honest about our history. The gospel topics are out. They've repudiated the racism. This is great. Honesty is starting to happen. Good leaders. They're taking us in the right direction. But then there is the crash, that they do this. They don't think it through. They lie about it. They've lied at every stage of introducing that policy. They lied about how it was formulated. And then 3.5 years later, President Nelson told loads of fibs while deconstructing it and claiming he had a revelation that God had now changed his mind and we were not to have this policy. I lost my temple recommend over it. So I was in a temple recommend interview and I said, well, I'll sustain the leaders, but I don't expect them to be perfect. And I want to make clear I don't agree with everything they say, and I don't agree with the November policy. This is clearly wrong. But it's okay, because we know that our leaders can be fallible, and the church has admitted in the gospel topics essay that the racism was wrong. They've disavowed it.
Can I just quickly go back
go on.
to
Yes,
when you're saying, when you're saying about the thing about sustaining our leaders, I guess it depends on how you frame that word in your mind. Because for me, and I taught it to my young women, and whether it's the church's way of teaching it, I was like, I didn't care at the time. Because for me, sustaining your leaders, you sustain them and you're supporting them, and you'll stand by them. But for me, it doesn't mean you have to absolutely let the pens out. It means you don't absolutely have to agree with everything they say. They say to question is good. It's healthy sometimes, but yet you're not allowed to question these leaders. And that is what makes me so angry, because sustaining for me does not mean that you have to absolutely 100% agree with everything they say. They say we have the right to personal revelation. So can we not for ourselves pray to God and find out whether that's right or not?
Well,
who are we? We're just people.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem. This is why I've framed my podcast as a Mormon civil war, as Christian Mormons versus Pharisee Mormons. We're taught both. We're taught two completely opposite religions when you start to disentangle it. You're taught that you have free agency. You think for yourself. You choose for yourself. You work it out in your own mind. You talk to God. But if in doing that, you decide you disagree with the leader, or that the prophet isn't completely immaculately perfect, and you don't like something they've done, that's not allowed either, because they are the infallible mouthpiece of God.
Really,
and
we don't have free agency.
So you don't have free agency. So
Absolutely
we're taught completely opposite messages at once. And this is why so many members of the church are just confused the whole time, because they think it's one religion. They're told it's one religion. But when you start to actually look at it carefully, you realize there's two religions here. And it's nothing new. The great news, we don't have to invent a new paradigm. This is Jesus versus the Pharisees. The Pharisees overdid the rules in the authoritarianism and not questioning the leaders. Jesus said, your additions and over-obsession with rules has stopped the gospel functioning. You've lost the spirit of the law. You're hurting people rather than helping them. And they fought. And then it goes back even further. The war in heaven and the pre-existence is literally, and I love this about Mormonism, a battle between freedom and tyranny. Lucifer's plan is, I will tell you what to do. You will obey it with exact obedience. You won't question. You won't think, because you can't be trusted to think for yourself, and you will make mistakes and sin if you think for yourself. So I promise you, his big lie, you can still become a god without thinking. I'll do your thinking for you. You just obey. That was his offer. And a third of us went for it, because people will always, a percentage of people will accept dictatorship in return for the promise of safety and security, rather than having to think for themselves. Jesus's plan is, no, you have to take risks. You're going to think for yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You'll sin. I'll deal with that. I'll atone for that. It's the only way to become a god. You have to learn from your own experiences. And that's the clash, and it's still playing out now.
Aren't we following Satan's way, really?
Which is why one of the trigger words that have got me excommunicated is I've called the leaders Satanists. I've said they're practicing the religion of Lucifer. But don't just throw it out as an insult. Say, oh, Satanists. I then explain it. There's hours of podcast time.
But that's how I feel about it. And I've not even listened to all of your podcasts yet. But when I'm looking at things, I was speaking to Jane about this other day, and I don't want to take up much of your time, but, we're told what we can and can't do. We're, like you say, thinking for yourself. It's only now that I've left the church that I'm now starting to think, how do I really feel about this? do I really agree with that? And I'm really, really digging deep into things. Whereas before I didn't. I just went with it because it's what I was taught. That was the way to go. Whereas, and so for me, and Jane and I spoke about this the other day, I feel, are we following Jesus' plan? Because to me, we're not.
Yeah. And they warned us, Doug's just put up that quote from Brigham Young, that he didn't want people just to be sheep and follow the leaders and never question them. Because as you said, Alana, you didn't learn it for yourself. You never learned to think for yourself, to own your religion from your own free will choice. You were just doing as you're told. And that's a different experience. So my journey has been towards realizing we can't fix this on a local level. You can be as lovely and kind in your local stake as you like. You will still lose 25% of your active members every year, like mine did. We've got a lovely state. The people are gorgeous. They're wonderful. But we're losing people for these reasons outside of the state's control. It has to be. So that's why I'm calling out the leadership and the system that created their mindset and put them there, and which is dysfunctional and is not the scriptural one. So this, of course, puts my head above the parapet. And I knew that, the outcome is highly likely to be excommunication because they don't tolerate any distance. So in a way, this early little taster experience with my state president in 2015, whenever exactly it was, and he couldn't cope with that because he didn't get the message I did from reading the Gospel Topics essay. He had read it, the race and the priesthood one, but he said, I don't think it admits that God wasn't behind the racism and so on. And he withheld my temple recommend for months. He said, I need to think about this, because I was daring to disagree with one thing that the church had already disavowed. And secondly, something that was about to be disavowed. I turned out to be right, because the church abandoned the November policy a year or two later, which should have been obvious from the start. So that was my first real kerfuffle with, we've got a serious problem, and the problem is the leaders, because they are claiming as revelations things that are just their very right-wing, socially conservative, backward-looking, grumpy granddad worldview, and we hate the gays. So we're so hating the gays so much, we're gonna stop their children being baptized in our religion. That the narrative has always been, if there's anyone whose home life doesn't match the church ideal, we hold them closer. We will bring them to every meeting. We'll take them to the temple trip. We'll be their parents. We'll support them to love their parents, but where they need extra Mormonism input, we'll do it. Their young men and young women's leaders will do it. Their primary presidents will do it. We all rally around. We hold them close. And after the November policy came out, there was a session, I think it was a priesthood session of General Conference, that I went to the chapel to watch. And Bednar or someone was teaching that when there are people whose home life it's totally kosher with the church as it sees it, we will hold them close. We give them extra support. And I'm quite vocal, but I very rarely just get so angry I have a strop. I just got up and I had to walk out, and I've never done that before. I walked out because I usually want to stay and listen to the full horror of it all, and bitch about it later. But I was so upset. I was like, I cannot sit and listen to this. These people who've just done this to all these families I know, all these children growing up in primary and suddenly telling them they can't be baptized because their dad's gay, even if they're still living with mum, not that that's a bad thing, but I was so upset. And one of the young men who's awesome just came out to see how I was doing as I was about to cross the road and walk home in a huff. But it was this hypocrisy. And then we found out how much they're robbing us, the money, the financial corruption. And as I said before, the last ward I was in, Welling, is 180 years old, still doesn't have a chapel because the church intentionally didn't bid enough for the land that we kept finding while telling us to pray for a miracle. And then that they spent £103 million last year on investing commercially in a tower block in London of offices, £103 million. They could buy that, but for 180 years, they haven't paid for Welling Ward, which is 20 minutes away from Alder Castle tower block or office block, to have a chapel. So I'm now livid. I am incandescent with rage. These people are corrupt. They lie and they lie and they lie. And it's not a victimless crime. My sister has lost her testimony after some of their teaching. My stepson has left the church after a lot of what they were teaching and doing. My friends are leaving, one after the other. Members of my bishoprics, several members of my bishopric in the ward I'm in now have left over this stuff. The obsession with money, the failure to be Christian, the judgmental culture that they teach at church, where you have to exactly obey everything or you're not acceptable. And I'm still dealing with this idea of trying to speak truth. I can't even tell my ward members what's in the gospel topics essays without them having a crisis because they think I'm going to break someone's testimony. So I'm posting the information about these scandals, frankly, and that the church in Britain has hoarded £5 million of donations to the perpetual education funds and humanitarian aid funds. And none of it has been spent on helping those causes. And I was a ward clerk putting little old ladies' money into the envelopes that I knew they can't afford. Really generous donations because they think they're helping the people they see on the news. And it's just making more money for the church. So my state president got involved. He paid attention. He noticed I was posting these things. He came and spoke and listened. He listened for hours while I waffled on, splurging all these things I've splurged at you. And we met a few times. But as I continued posting about them, he never really address the issues I was making. He wanted me to channel it somehow positively. He wants everything controlled and calm and moderate and nothing rocking the boat. And then I started doing the podcast. I was writing a really long essay where I'm starting to think, right, this is too much. We all have, there's 50 things here. Can we ever make sense of it all and get a point of view where we can cope with it and still save the church? And I started writing this incredibly long essay. And then I thought, no one's going to read this. I'll do an audio. They can listen to it. People listen to podcasts. So that was my first episode of Mormon Civil War, Christians versus Pharisees. And then it quickly escalated over the last few months into a podcast, well over 10,000 downloads now. If I released one, it's about 1,000 people a week listening to it in podcasts or YouTube. And I am being deluged with messages, as you said, saying, thank you, just heartfelt thank you. You are saying what I'm thinking. No one else is saying it. You are speaking the truth to the power. This is happening to my family. And I'm not the only person sort of discussing these issues online, but I'm one of the very few who actually wants the church to survive at the end of it. And they're saying also, I can feel your love for this religion. You're actually drawing me back. You're, in contrast to these bad things, you are talking about how Mormonism should be and could be and once was, and what our potential as a religion is. There's the balance with the positive, and they're hearing it and feeling it. At least 2 people have said I've actually reactivated them. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. It's not my intention necessarily, but they're hearing that positivity, that hope. So many people saying, listening to your podcast is the only reason I'm still coming to church, because you've given me back a hope. You've reminded me of that religion we had in the 1980s that I've just watched being eroded and go away and be changed into this totalitarian control freakery, and these homophobic messaging and so on. So I'm getting all that feedback, but all my stake president is hearing is, you called the leaders loose Satanists. You said they're liars. You called, these people these names, these words. You are being aggressive. You've crossed the line. We can't cope with this as Mormons. It is outside our parameters. Why can't you just moderate your language and not include the anger and the outrage? And then if you keep doing this, church discipline will become necessary. And he was reading the script of every podcast I was writing. He wouldn't listen to it because he's like an academic and he likes to read instead. Maybe that's why he experienced it differently. But all he was hearing was the bad. And other people are. I get it, because we're trained to in our culture. as soon as you express anger, you've chased away the Holy Spirit. You've
Because
invited
it's a
Satan.
negative emotion.
Because it's a negative emotion. You're bringing conflict. You are creating contention by having a strong, angry emotion. But it was okay for Jesus to do it, apparently, and that came up in my trial.
And I would just point
yeah.
out that just speaking on
Mm.
behalf of those who are, who have been thankful,
Yeah.
as members of the church who've come back to the church, I have, felt inspired and invigorated, excited by the fact that here's another member who is talking about difficulties and hard things. And although some of the language is maybe a bit much for me, it's maybe not what I would use. Fantastic, because this is what is possible. We can talk about hard things and we don't have to freak out. Look at what could happen. That's exciting. People could stay in this church without all feeling that we have to conform. So you get a letter inviting you. Now, this is a bit difficult because we've had COVID, we've been in lockdown. This would have happened a while ago. Bring us up to your letter. How were you preparing for this?
So I knew I had my dark night of the soul when he first threatened church discipline, and then when basically when it was first threatened, because I was like, this is really on the cards. It's not just theoretical now. This could happen to me. And what really helped me immediately was that other people have shared their experiences of this, of being excommunicated for apostasy. So John Zelin, he recorded his one. Jeremy Reynolds recorded his. Bill Reel recorded his one. So we've actually sat in the room with those disciplinary procedures, and they were not very functional. The guys were amazing. Like, they gave amazing defenses. They explained what the problems were. But they were speaking to a wall. These people had already made a decision.
Bring us back to your dark night of the soul.
So that's
I only saw you being incredibly, Alan and I, right?
Yeah.
We're like, he's so happy, he's so upbeat, he's got such a sense of humor about this. I mean, we've had so many, we've been able to laugh a lot, right?
And talk about you behind your back all the time, Peter.
Yeah, and amongst the Brit Vengers, we've been incredibly entertained. It's been great. But Alana and I are also like, this cannot be easy. So talk to us about
partly I'm a bloke, so we don't have the lady feelings. So just stop harassing me about that.
Actually do though. They're deep down in the soul.
No, I think I'll tell you what it is. I felt all of that anger and pain, but I've been feeling it for years. I've been involved in conversations about this stuff for a decade now. Every week I'm furious. I watch people's experiences. I see them process their pain. I have been so upset and angry and livid and just disappointed in the leaders not being anything close to as good as they could be and should be for what my people deserve, And so it's been, in a sense, it's been there all along. There's nothing more I can add to that, really, because it's already happening to my loved ones. You can't do anything more to me, really. You've already broken me. You've broken the illusion I had that my church was so perfect and wonderful, and we had all the answers, and I seemed to be delivering that. In my experiences at university, there was no reason to worry about anything. The church was growing exponentially, and now all of that has been taken away, and it's a grief. But I think the reason I kind of bounced back fast is I've already seen these other people go through it, and they've talked about how hard it was for them. It surprised them, even though they were already dissidents. In a way, it shouldn't have been a surprise, but they describe excommunication as an act of violence. And it messes with your soul and your family deeply. And I think because I'd already gone through that with them, I was like, when my time comes, it's going to be different. I'm taking control of this situation. I'm not going into that room as a victim. I'm not going to give them that power over me. So I was empowered, but because of them sharing their stories and helping me to do that, I couldn't have done it on my own. But then when it seemed, I was like, right, what would this actually feel like if I'm not a member of this church I love? Let's take this seriously now. And I was like, do you know what? This is more important. It's more important that I keep speaking up, because this is my religion. This is my religion. They can't take my religion from me. They haven't been able to take it from all these people they drove out. Those people care more and know more about this religion than the people still going. You know, if you want to find someone who really knows this church, its religion, its history and doctrines inside out, find someone who's had a faith crisis and done the research. They have educated themselves up the wazoo, and it's not been just an intellectual experience. They have prayed like they never prayed before. They have pleaded with God to make it work and help them to stay. They have tried everything and they just couldn't, because there was so much that was broken in many cases. A few are still hanging in there, but most leave. And they are now, as we've talked about before, the church in exile. The Church of Jesus Christ in exile. They still, and I was discussing this with someone today, and I think it kind of clicked what's different about this time. Why is it now, when people are leaving this church, they're hanging around? Ex-Mormon Reddit has gone from 80,000 people to 200,000 in just a couple of years. Mormon Stories podcast is huge. Millions of people watch this stuff. Why are people hanging around? Why are they not just going away? And I think it's because what the general authorities have done is they've taken what was a medium tent Mormonism, not yet a big one, but medium, and they've shrunk the boundary. They've made it a tiny tent Mormonism. And just outside that are literally millions of people who would still be coming to church if it wasn't toxic, who would still be coming if it was safe. They still have that religion in their heart, or at least those values and ideals. So they haven't detached entirely. The walls of our fortress churches. Who talks about a fortress church?
Someone we know who's coming on this.
Someone we know.
In a few
Could it be Patrick Mason in his amazing book Restoration, God's Message for the 21st Century, who you've got on this show? So he talks about the fortress church, and this is it. And what they've done is they've made it so tight and demanding and pharisaical that the majority of church members are now outside the walls of their fortress. But they would easily be in it. They haven't abandoned the church's values or their love for it. And of course, the more they tighten it, most of those people are the husband of the active member, the wife of the active member, the child of the active member, the parents of the active member. So it is your family. You can't leave this religion alone. Everything that happens in it directly impacts whether your siblings are going to be nice to you next time you see them, or if they're going to be disappointed. And that is personal pain, and it fractures friendships. I've had massive rows with my wonderful brother because he's just as stubborn as I am, so you can imagine how they went. We've kind of reached a truce now where we just don't talk about religion with each other, and it's healing, which is nice. But that was rough. You know, it does divide families. It divided mine in lots of really significant ways. And it hurts parents, you know.
I wonder when I think about I'm seeing similarities between you and Alana's sort of responses to issues that they've sort of seen in the church, because for the most part Alana's experiences have been for yourself pretty positive. But when Alana sees marginalized groups being attacked, or sort of friends who are not feeling included or in pain, you could yell at Alana and Alana would be very hurt. But if you yell at Alana's friend, Alana will go after you with all that she has. And I'm kind of seeing that similarity with, when I wondered, how are you coping, Peter? And I feel like what I'm seeing is you consistently bring it back to the bigger picture, to people, and so I just think that's really, really inspiring for those of us who have never experienced church discipline, or who haven't experienced church discipline as a priesthood holder. Could you talk about what that was like for you?
Yeah, so it's very formal. It is like a court. Well, first of all, some of the rules that the leaders changed in the handbook choose Doug as your friend, Alana. He's great.
I will be anyone's friend.
Yeah. So as you know, that one of the rules they changed was you don't have to have the High Council there anymore, that they can do a membership council just with the state presidency. In some ways that's positive because it means less of an audience if you're talking about embarrassing personal things you've confessed and really don't need the whole state to know about. I think that's great. But there is also this shadow side to that maybe they're reducing the witnesses of bad decision making and lead in these councils. Or some people suspect it's because in apostasy cases, they don't want everyone being infected by what the person might say. Anyway, so the scriptures say, though, that there must be the High Council present at a disciplinary. So I insisted on that. I said, I'm requesting the High Council, please. My state presidency were completely gracious about that. They said, yes, that's fine. We'd actually welcome more opinions in the room. That's great. We're going to have to delay it because of COVID and social distancing. So it got delayed twice, which was wonderful. It just bought me more time to get my head around things and prepare and make a hat, of course. So my approach going into it, I knew that I'd be walking into a room where you have the state presidency at one end, the High Council is kind of a U shape behind tables, and you sit at the far end. It's like a courtroom. When it is the whole High Council there. They all stand up when you walk in. It's kind of intimidating, but in my case, these are people I love. These are good friends of mine. There was my bishop for when I was a teenager there. 3 people I grew up with through youth, and other people I've loved, I've worked and served with. So in my case, it was family, and it was like being judged by your peers, which is sort of the British justice system. So I love that. That was good, but you can see how intimidating it is if you've got a hostile audience. And my intention always was as much as possible to be in control of this situation. I was given fairly short notice that I'd only have half an hour to speak, which for me is impossible, obviously. And so I
just
kind of
on that though, like I often think like half an hour for you to speak and defend something that is extremely important to you, that could affect your whole eternity, exaltation, and you get 30 minutes. That's it.
Yeah. That's outrageous. And some people have managed to negotiate for 40 minutes or an hour. But what ended up being brilliant in my case was that we had a long period of Q&A afterwards. And that's where the magic happened, in my view.
Right,
and
so
but going in, I was like, Lynn, I'm going in. I want a costume. I want sequins and feathers.
Now, we thought you had been joking. I mean, you're
genuinely
doing this for the whole time.
So I was like, I'm not getting my party. I've played nicely because people usually turn up for a visual. You 2 offered to fly down from Scotland, which was ridiculous, you nutters. And I knew we could have a whole fandango with a barbecue going on in the car park, which isn't really appropriate for COVID. It would totally freak out my people, because they're not used to this. So I was not having the jamboree, but I was going to have a costume. So Lynn negotiated. She begged me, no, please, no. I said, can I at least have a hat? She agreed, and she made me a doozy. So we have here my apostasy hat. Am I an apostate? ?
No,
with feathers. So we were doing this sort of live Facebook living while she was in the range trying to find all the ingredients for that at the last minute. So when it was my turn to speak, I put it on. I said, I'm an artist. I made a lot of these covenants that you are about to take away from me.
Wait. Hold on. We thought you wore it to make a grand entrance. You actually
I crowned myself when it was my turn. I had it in a
That's
bag.
what I'm just laughing at. I'm all like, I would love to have seen the look on their faces as you walk in with this flipping hat. And I didn't swear there. Sorry, I realise I shouldn't say those words because people might think I'm swearing.
Yeah, exactly.
But like,
No,
honestly, to see their faces.
Did anyone laugh or smile?
Oh yeah. No, they smile. I think even the state president cracked a smile. And he's So, and he's an academic who kind of lectures in protest art and things. So, I said, look, I made several. The temple endowment in my marriage was made. My crucial covenants you're potentially about to take away from me were made while wearing a silly hat. So I'm going to wear a silly hat for this. You know,
I'm sitting
for the
here wondering,
occasion.
Peter, if you're going down in history for that, if there's anyone else who's ever done anything like that.
That's basically my plan. I was like, if nothing else comes from this, every time that state presidency and high councillors think of my apostasy trial, the poor guys have been dragged out in the middle of a pandemic to come and listen to me waffle on. I want them at least to know they were there at the moment of history and they got to see the silly hat.
Well, you know,
Right, someone needs to get on that. We need to do some research and find out if anyone else has ever went into a disciplinary council wearing a costume or a hat, or I would love to know that.
Well, in church history and protest, we had a disgruntled wife of Brigham Young's who was not being very well cared for, who used to pitch up to General Conference, and anytime Brigham spoke, she would heckle him by doing like farmyard noises and stuff.
She did what noises? Sorry,
like farmyard noises, like cows, and she would just heckle him the whole time, and no one said a thing. She was like queen. So, yeah, I love it. Okay.
So I wore it a bit, then I just sat it on the table next to me, you know, and tried to portray it being a bit more serious.
I'm gonna lose it.
So basically, I'd also been able to prep people a bit, because I didn't want to face a wall of ignorance and like, why would you even say anything bad about the leaders? I wanted the people there to, you know, the state president should have known or knew because he'd read all my podcasts. So when I first got the summons, I sent back a quite long email to the first presidency members and as many high councillors I had email addresses for. And what I did was got them up to speed. I said, this is what I've been doing. This is what I've been saying. You can find it here. And this is kind of my defense. And I also reminded everyone that I had followed the proper channels. I had asked my state president in March, months before, and before then verbally, 3 questions that I wanted answered. And they got to the heart of the matter of what I was being tried for publicly opposing the leaders of the church. That was the basis of my apostasy trial. And he hadn't replied. And I'd sent this email reminder to him and his councillors and the High Council. No one seems to have said to him, can't you see Peter's setting you up here? Because I was transparent, you know, I wasn't cheating. I was saying, I will be mentioning this at the trial if you don't answer these questions. Because effectively what has happened is, on reflection, is I don't think my state president has really engaged with the content of what I'm saying. He's not addressed the evidence. He's just been very upset that he thinks I'm fomenting or starting revolution and contention. And he began by just listing loads of words that he'd spent hours reading through all my stuff to make a list of words.
But I think that's their intent all along, though. That it's not, for me, like when I think about that, it's not about answering your questions. They just see you as someone who's speaking out against the church and the leaders. So it's like, let's shut him up. Like, he doesn't get to have a say. That's how I feel anyway. I'm not saying every leader does that, but but I guess.
And this is where Alana and I have enjoyed quite a nice sort of back and forth about this too, because I'm curious to know, and obviously we're speculating about someone else's, opinions. If you hadn't used the term liar, stuff like that, would they have had the same? Would you had a...
that's a really good question, and I wouldn't not be me. You know, one of the things Lynn said when she had her chance to speak was, I've learned it's not my job to tone police Peter. Absolutely. It's not my place. That's his voice. That's how he expresses himself, and I trust his moral compass. So you know, you're making it about tone, and the word tone was used in the verdict letter. And in a way, and it is intentional, but the thing is, I'd explained that over and over again in the podcast. I'd explained the reason for that. And I'm not just swearing randomly. It's very few times I've been that blunt, but then I've explained why. It's like, it's robust to say, but the point is, these leaders are teaching what you taught me in seminary was Lucifer's plan of salvation, of unquestioning obedience. You taught me as a teenager that alarm bells should go off if anyone ever says to me, this is the plan of salvation. You tell me in the temple, in the endowment, what Lucifer's tactics are, and that I must defend the church again. My oath and covenant as a Melchizedek priesthood holder is to guard the flock like a shepherd from the wolves in sheep's clothing, who look like they're other sheep, other saints, but they're teaching the false doctrine, the Lucifer's plan of salvation. You've told me I'm a watchman in a tower, I think Ezekiel says that, warning the people in the city of dangers coming. I'm saying to you, there's dangers coming for your family. Your children are not going to stay in this church for these reasons, because the leaders have lied about the history, and they will find out. Because they're teaching a doctrine of command and control obedience, not empowering them to think and make their own choices wisely and thoughtfully, and have that autonomy. It's literally the opposite gospel to what we thought was our religion, or was told it was our religion and believe is our religion. So it's it's the message, and they chose to shoot the messenger and silence me.
Alana and I had felt really strongly we'd wanted just to sort of check in with you afterwards to make sure that you were doing okay, and to tell you that we love you. And we had sort of welcomed you into, unjokingly, into sort of what is traditionally a kind of female space. It's tone policing is a world we walk in. And so it was so obvious to us that that's what was happening. But the other thing that had really struck me, while you were so positive, you were really upbeat, and you felt like, and so I will get you to to comment on that a little bit, but I wanted to sort of suggest perhaps what I've been speaking to Alana about this earlier today, and we had a really good discussion about this, that when you have a trial, which we're going to just call it a trial because that's what it was,
there's a judge and a jury.
Yeah, right.
There is. Absolutely is.
The people that you are looking at are your friends, the people who have watched you grow. They are the people that you've shared loads of experiences with. You look at them with love, and that is vital for that process, because like I was sort of saying, if Alana had a witnessed that, Alana would have wanted to punch someone in the face because they're speaking to you like that. How dare you?
I actually said to Jane a few of the excommunications that I've listened to, and I don't know these people. I'm like, I want to go across that table or desk and just grab them by the throat.
Because we don't know them and we don't have that relationship, but it's key to this process that you must know. They love you, and they're going to express that repeatedly.
And then they will stab you in the back.
And that was my point to Jane. I'm like, yeah, they can sit there. Like, I listened to one recently. I can't even remember his name. And it was so frustrating because it wasn't, to me, the disciplinary counsellor it should have been. It was all this, we love you. And even when your family come in to speak, it was like, we really love your family. This isn't personal. This, whatever.
You have shared before on this podcast, so I'm aware that we were talking about it earlier today, and that's something that you're okay with us talking about, but that's an experience that you are very familiar with. That when we have relationships with people who are telling us that they love us, but they are behaving in a way that is abusive, your love for them is key to that. So I was listening to how you were speaking, and this is me, the faithful member, who was sort of feeling like that it just sounds so abusive. So would you speak to you felt overall positive, so let's go into that.
Yeah, so I didn't want that to happen. I wasn't going to go in there and let people get away with just smothering me and pretending it's all nice in a court of love when it's not. I said this is an act of violence, at some point. And so I said straight away at the beginning, I'm not planning to. Shiz, Matt Allen, Shiz is one of his. So what I started doing is using Book of Mormon place names and names as instead of swears. So there aren't that many swears. It sounds like it's full of potty mouth stuff. It's really not. There's hours of really boring nerdy analysis in the podcast, but the awesome, invigorating nerdy analysis. So I said at the beginning, I'm not going to hold your decision against you. This is a system, and I'm fighting a system, not you personally. You know, you are my friends. But as we do this, maybe you can have a think. I want, you know, this is part of the preamble that I did get to say from what I'd written and prepared. I want you to have a think about what's going on here and what you're witnessing. That a bunch of blokes from Kent have kind of taken it upon themselves to judge my eternal soul, and how, in a way, how ridiculous that is. You know, how presumptuous. And what does this, you know, have some deep thoughts about this whole system of how power is expressed and how dissent is suppressed. I can't remember if I was that eloquent, but, you know, making that point, though, that to be aware of what this really is. I'm not pretending here. And I dealt with things assertively. Now, what was brilliant and why I came out buzzing is the best I could hope for. I mean, excommunication was basically inevitable, although when it took 7 days to get the verdict, I was starting to wonder what's going on. Like, have I broken the church, you know? But the best I wanted was simply to be heard, to speak to these people I care about and who are the leadership class of my stake, and just hold them accountable in a way, to put them on trial, to say, we have failed here and you can't deny the data. So I recap the data. 80% of our young people leave before they're 30. In the UK, we're down to less than 15% of our members are active. This stake lost 25% of its active members in the last 10 years. What have you done about it? And I got into the situation because one of the criticisms made by the stake president, apart from my outrageous statements in my aggressive, hostile, warmongering podcast, is that I came across as aggressive at church. And he kind of implied I was bringing my podcast level stuff into the classroom, which I'm absolutely not. But they were having trouble finding people to teach the lesson because they were scared I was going to be there and kind of call them out on stuff or whatever. And I said back, well, that's because they can't handle it anymore. The people who used to cope with it have gone. And I'm not bringing anything more than is in the gospel topics essays and what I learned at seminary. And I gave an example, and one of the high counselors said, yeah, I learned that in seminary, of something I'd said that had upset people. And so I said, you have not taught these adults the gospel topics essays. You have failed to educate them. And I said, I've heard on, you know, from my bishop that you are discussing now maybe doing an institute class about them for the adults, but they've been around since 2013. So you're not doing it. I'm trying to inform people. This is what I'm doing. I'm teaching them the stuff you have not taught them. You've not prepared them to cope. You've not prepared them not to panic if I open my mouth in a lesson. And the stake pres was a bit defensive because he's like, well, we are teaching this to the seminary institute kids and so on, which he's involved with. And I said, yeah, but not the adults. You've dropped the ball on that one. And I pointed out that this is an intentional strategy that insiders have admitted. You know, the Rustone Rolling writer, Richard Bushman, has admitted, you know, in the famous sort of fireside he did, that this is the intention of the church, that they're not going to upset the grandmothers of Sanpete County. But in doing that, they're losing their grandsons. They're losing the younger generation as the sacrifice for that. And it's a short-sighted strategy because there's no church left if the kids go. So I gave it back. You know, I held them accountable and said, you have failed to do this. And now I'm a victim of this because I'm bringing stuff to church that they should already know because you taught it to them. Why have you not taught them? And then, and I've followed the, you know, we're told in the church that you shouldn't go public with, don't wash the dirty linen in public. What, ladies, are we told to do instead? If we have a question or concern, what should we do, Alana and Jane? What have you been told?
Take it to your leaders.
We take it to the Lord. And if it's something that we can't resolve, then I would be expected to take it to my bishop.
Like to your bishop or whatever. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yep.
So I was like, so I've already had, and the point, and so I talked about some of the really difficult issues. So I'm like, the bishops can't cope with this. They don't have the answers because you haven't taught them. You've not prepared them for this. I can't. or if I do, I'm getting my temple recommend taken away because my state. I don't think I referenced that in the trial, but it's an example. My state president at the time couldn't even cope with the content of the race and the priesthood essay, which he'd read, but he hadn't understood it, So, and I said, big dramatic moment, gotcha. I've asked the state president since March, and I've emailed to all of you 3 specific questions. You have still failed to answer them. And they speak to what the criticisms I'm making. Question number 1, why have the donations of the British saints to the Perpetual Education Fund and the International Humanitarian Aid Fund, which now total £5 million, for 5 years just been piled up in a bank account earning interest? I spoke to the state president about that a year ago, and he said he'd find out what's going on and never has. So but if he engaged with that evidence, if anyone did, that proves the financial corruption that I'm calling them out on, because that's been the subject of some of my Facebook posts that upset them. The church is hoarding money, Ensign Peak, $100 billion from tithing, and while they're telling the destitute to pay tithing instead of feeding their children. Second question goes to their authority and my criticisms of the fact that they're running a system of leadership that isn't what the scriptures say, that the leadership system shouldn't be a dictatorship of 15 apostles. The scriptures say lots of democratic voting, more quorums involved. Why is it that the first presidencies for generations now have chosen and ordained themselves in secret with all these priesthood keys and authority and not had a vote of the membership first? In every other calling in the church, you do not ever lay hands on someone's head and set them apart for a calling or ordain them to priesthood unless the people vote first to sustain or oppose that decision. That's essential. That's the law of common consent. And this is something that, again, I'm embarrassed about. I never noticed this. All my life, it never occurred to me.
Me neither. Till you brought it up, I hadn't really thought about it.
But obviously, I mean, we don't have a change of president that often, so it's not like it's always in our face. But when you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like, hang on a minute. It was 3 months after President Nelson had himself ordained and booted out Uchtdorf and replaced him and so on. And they ordained themselves. Then they had a press conference. They told the world before the members that they'd got a new leadership in our church. And then it was 3 months before we had a general conference, the solemn assembly, when they put on the show, will the 70 now stand up and vote to sustain or oppose the new first presidency, and the women and the elders and the Aaronic priesthood. And they did it all. But that was all meant to happen before anyone had any hands put on their head. It was a farce. It was insulting. So that was my second question, because basically this contradicts Doctrine and Covenants 2065, which says no one can have any calling in the church without first having a vote of the people. So and that gets to the heart of it. This is the piece of kryptonite, I keep using that analogy, that blows up the authority of the first presidency. Technically, they are not the first presidency. No one voted to sustain them before they chose themselves. They've created a little club, a little oligarchy that perpetuates itself with no accountability to the people. And I'm being put on trial for apostasy for publicly opposing the first presidency. But you can't even justify to me that they are the first presidency, because technically, according to our scriptures, not even technically, according to our scriptures, they are not. They're imposters. Would you mind answering that question? And then the third question was, when you find out that the leaders might not be the first presidency and that they're robbing people and that they're lying, what should I do? What is the right thing for an elder in the Melchizedek priesthood to do, bearing in mind my duty of care to my members, to my family, to protect them from liars and thieves? Like Jesus used those phrases where thieves come in, to steal. And what should I do? Guide me. What's the appropriate? Should I vote opposed? There's options here. But while you didn't answer that question, State President, I'm talking about it in my podcast. You know, I'm speaking about it. I'm having that conversation. I'm dealing with this. I'm discussing with other members a way through the things you are not dealing with, the balls you have dropped, your failure to educate people about the gospel topics essays, your failure to answer my basic questions about the authority of the leaders, and so on. And I'm challenging the system that has created all this oppression and shooting messengers. So though I was really surprised, but I'm kind of having fun with it now, because that's going to be the basis of my appeal to the first presidency, which I've told the state president. You know, I sent him a reply. I've emailed him back. You know, my state president didn't answer my questions. He hasn't followed due process.
Exactly. But before we get to that part, okay, so you have
I fought back.
You got quite a lot of time. You have experienced it in a positive way. You got to look people in the eye
and people were allowed to ask questions, which was brilliant. The state president let any of the high councillors ask questions, and that dialogue was brilliant. We covered so much stuff. Yeah, it was good.
What is the wait like? I was so concerned about that wait and how you would be experiencing it.
Yeah. What was it like? Yeah, I found it validating and empowering. I knew
you're waiting for the result.
I see. Sorry, afterwards. Yes, yes. No, I felt good about it. What I'd done is think through each of the outcomes and what the positives of each would be. You know, I'm a can-do, look at the positive opportunity kind of person. I prayed. I said to God, look, the outcome. Please make the outcome, if you are influencing this at all, can you make it the one that will help the cause? And I said, if it's excommunication, I'll take that hit. I'll be the martyr. I'll be another of these bodies on the pile. I'll be another of the martyrs who the church kicked out for telling the truth. And I will use that to further the cause of reform in this church, because there's nothing to lose. The church will just, you know, I said to them, what's going to happen if we're to the high council and everyone? I said, based on our last 10 years, what will happen over the next 10 years is more of your children will leave the church. At least 2 of you, I think that's a fair percentage, are going to lose your testimonies of this religion. You are going to click online. You are going to go down the rabbit hole because people sitting in your chair did it last year, and then the year before, and the year before that. You know, it's an ongoing process. And then in 10 or 15 years, you are going to start selling our buildings. You're going to close ward after ward because there'll be not enough people there to keep them open. The young have gone, the elderly will die, and I'll be there because I'm stubborn. I'll be there. I might be the last one standing, you know, but I'll be there. And I will look you in the eye, and you'll have to look me in the eye. But how about we realize that's coming and make the changes now so we don't see that happen? You know, so
So I was just thinking as you were talking there, you know, in regards to, you know, waiting 7 days to a year. So I'm a bit curious. Again, you know, I've been digging into the John Dillon rabbit hole these days, and I'm listening to a lot of people's excommunications, who the naughty people who have recorded it. And so, like, there was one that I listened to recently where they made the decision within 5 minutes on the night. I've listened to other ones where they've only waited maybe 2 to 3 days. So I'm only curious as to why do you think it took 7 days? And like, I thought about this myself. I tried to answer one question and I'm thinking, okay, maybe they're deliberating, maybe, you know, the High Council, some of them are maybe throwing some wee spanners in the works saying, well, you know, but then doesn't it really lie with the state president? Like, it doesn't matter how other people feel.
No, that's right.
Why did it take 7 days then? Because that kind of shut down my theory of, you know, but then I realised and remembered that listening to a podcast that someone said it's the stake president's decision. So
Mm.
I can't for the
Yeah.
life of me understand why it took him 7 days.
Yeah. So I don't think it was. I don't think the stake president ever changed his mind. To be honest, he's just been on the one track since he finally lost patience, and he's repeated the same thing. And I'm disappointed in that, because he received like 20 pages or whatever of amazing letters from people. 3 of them who'd been in stake presidencies, but people from all over the world, all situations, all of them saying, Peter is speaking my truth. This is a real issue. The concerns he's raising with the leadership are the reason my family left the church. And I can't come back. But if what Peter's advocating for, I might come back. This would be a safe church for me to be in. And so he'd had all those witnesses. He said he'd read them, but I don't think any of that sunk in. The other high councillors were lovely. A lot of them said they'd been listening to the podcast. They'd taken time to get informed. They agreed with a lot of what I'm saying. I think one of them said he agreed with everything I've said. They all emphasized they can see that I love the gospel. I love Jesus Christ. That's not in doubt. So normally they were, after our 2.5 hours of conversation, Lynn and I popped into town to get some food, and when we came back they were still chatting. So I do think there was a long conversation afterwards. And the stake president, I know, was agonizing. I'm sure he's lost a lot of sleep over this. He's been agonizing. He said so. So he's poor thing. Not poor thing. It's his fault for doing it. He's suffered, and the longer it went on, I thought, I don't know what's going on. Maybe have the High Council resigned? Have I broken? Your mind.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, have you broken them all? Are they all leaving the church?
Shall I go and persuade them to come back to activity, or what's going on? And the email with the verdict came at about 2 a.m. So I think the stake pres just decided he'd rather have some sleep and be done with it and push send.
Right. I want to ask more. Sorry, Jane, just quickly about your feelings. Were you anxious about it? Were you did you have any feelings at all?
No, I'm a robot. Remember? No. I just got busy with the next podcast. I concentrate on positive things. What I did, though, was I was mentally preparing myself for any outcome. So if my membership was to stay, which was highly unlikely, I knew that this would put the stake president in a very difficult position, because it would imply that he approved of everything I'm saying, and I am calling for a revolution. I'm not afraid to use that word. He thought it was appalling that I would mention revolution or rebellion, and he just sees that as all negative. And that reforms to get back to how the church should be is what it is. If I was disfellowshipped, I thought actually that might be quite a good solution, because they get what they want, which is to silence me. I'm not allowed to teach or give talks or speak controversially at church. I think I can make positive comments in lessons. I'm not totally silenced, but I can't bring the difficult information anymore that upsets people. And I'd keep my membership, so as and when the church regains its sanity, I wouldn't have to get rebaptized or something. It would be easier to just kind of reinstate things. So I quite liked that option. Maybe I should have argued for it at the thing. Excommunication, I become a force ghost. I become more powerful than they can possibly imagine. They are handing me a microphone on a plate, and which I told them. I told him. He knew this. I said, if you ex me for this, I will have a bigger voice than ever. I will be a martyr. I will have that power. You will make my voice 10 times stronger. I do think there's a part of him that kind of wants these things talked about and dealt with, but he just lost patience with my style,
Well, I think that it was clearly, I think, from what I could see from afterwards, I think it was probably taken like a threat. So are you comfortable to talk about the letter that you received?
Yeah. So I've sort of read bits of it before, but it was very clear that the language, I'll just read a couple of paragraphs that I have before. He sort of said, the council proceedings confirmed to me that 2 of the handbook's criteria are relevant in your case. You've repeatedly acted in, he's just quoting the whole of the handbook. So you've repeatedly acted and continue to act in clear and deliberate public opposition to the church, its doctrine, its policies, or its leaders. And 2, you've shown a pattern of intentionally working to weaken the faith and activity of church members. Now, I'm really cross with that letter because that is introducing stuff that wasn't in the original accusation. The original accusation that I was going prepared to defend was agitation against the leaders, which, you know, we can talk about. He's just quoting the whole chunk, but I'm not opposed to the church. I'm not opposed to its doctrines. I certainly have issues with policies, but they only added disagreeing with policy as an apostate offence last year. You know, because they want total control. You can't even criticize the policies in the handbook without being an apostate. You know, that's intense. But this idea I'm intentionally working to weaken the faith and activity of members, that's ridiculous. Everything I'm about is helping people to stay and stay, you know.
And when we were discussing it sort of the night after it had come in, you know, Alana and I had really wanted to, you know, just sort of be there to support you as sisters.
Which I really appreciated. Thank you. We had a good chat.
We really wanted to, you know, you know what, we'll get into that, but my feeling is that that's a incredibly subjective thing, because, you know, as a member of the church, I don't think you're weakening I'm seeing the opposite. Would it be okay, are you comfortable with you know, reading the sentence about the tone of
so both your writings and your presentation at the council meet those criteria, although the tone of most of your church related posts since June 2018 has consistently been hostile and contentious. The publication of the Mormon Civil War essays marked a new level of hostility. At the council, I quoted some of the language you used to describe our leaders and the general membership. He thinks I'm attacking the members as well. I do not know of any organization, religious or non-religious, that would tolerate this level of abuse directed against leaders and members, which is nonsense, because in a political party, other churches won't excommunicate you for criticizing the Pope robustly. You know, it just won't happen.
Yeah, let me just, before you continue, first of all, I want to shout out to our Nemo, who's joined us in the chat, if anyone wants to say hi to Nemo.
Hey, Nemo.
Nemo, we're trying so hard to get this guy to talk about feelings, and he's just refusing. So, you know, we're doing our best. Yeah, what I was really frustrated by is it talks about the tone, and that is a hugely triggering thing to say. So, in my opinion, again, it's subjective, but in my opinion, I mean, hostile and contentious, I utterly reject that statement. Now, your tone is bloody cheeky. There are moments when, you know, I'm a bit scandalized by, you know, you calling the prophet a liar and a Satanist. I mean, it's a bit shocking. It is most certainly not hostile and contentious. It's funny. It's very tongue-in-cheek at times. I don't see this as an aggressive sort of act. Now that's fine, but when you know, like you say, he moves on to talk about no one else let this happen.
That's not real, you know, and it just feels like he's very in a track where he wants everything controlled and calm, and he said so, you know, speak kindly, why not, you know, and that sort of thing. And we had a really interesting dialogue in the meeting, actually, in the trial, because they were talking about this in terms of being Christ-like. You know, we feel that things should be done kindly, with love, with gentleness, you know, like in a Christ-like way. And I said, well, that isn't all that Christ did. Christ got angry. Christ flipped tables. Christ swore and shouted at the Pharisees in the streets. You know, that's holy as well. Righteous. There is a time for war. There's a time for anger. There's a time for everything, as you know, Ecclesiastes, whatever it is, says. And they just couldn't accept that, because all their Pharisee religion training, as I label it, is no, that can't be, because being angry is contention and is of the devil.
Yeah.
They couldn't accept, and he made a flippant comment along the lines of, well, you know, all Christian anarchists say that. It's like, well, yeah, for a reason, because that's what Jesus was. He was a revolutionary, not an anarchist. It's not about chaos, but
also,
you know, but you could see the conditioning. This is the mind control, that people who get upset and angry can't have a valid point to make, and you neutralize them because of their emotion, and you ignore what they're saying and what they're upset and angry about, and you don't deal with it because you can ignore it. And usually this happens to women, because women tend to be more emotional. Women get tone policed all the time at church.
And so because and this is why, you know, we're sort of powerfully feeling like, I mean, these are so many feminine issues. We have this stuff every week in Relief Society, right? Like, I mean, it's all the time. When there are acceptable things for you to be angry about, and the point of that anger must be within certain bounds. There's part of me that can be okay with that. Now, what we can be angry about is what are some sistery type projects just now. Operation Underground Railroad. We're allowed to be righteously indignant about that, but with very calm voices. And you know, so I feel like when you are with a group of males who have power, and you're now in a position where we, you know, that's how we feel most weeks, you know, when we go and talk to things like that. That's
feeling your pain.
That dynamic is one that you have stepped into, that everything is going to be relating to your tone. So there is literally nothing you can say you know, that okay, if I change my words, will that help? And we do that. We, you know, we change our words, we change how we make all sorts of changes to make that power dynamic
comfortable.
So
why not just dance about like a fairy and say it in a nice angelic voice? Then maybe people will listen, right?
So that when you say there's not another organization that would allow this, well, we know.
I was furious at that part. That really annoyed me.
We cannot have a power dynamic where women in the workplace can feel abused, threatened, unsafe, or just that there is a power dynamic that could potentially be abused. That it gets acknowledged. There's systems in place to simply say, I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel safe. You know, political parties, you pointed out, our appreciation for royalty. I mean, there's nothing off limits in the world. You know, our friend of the show, Doug Vinston. I mean, Catholics slag, you know, the Catholic Church off all the time. You know, it's
no one's excommunicating them.
Right,
the priest isn't dragging them in for a word, you know.
And the priest doesn't sit up at night thinking, what am I going to do about this person? It's just not it's just not a thing. And it's there for our safety that we are allowed to express this.
But they're not the one true church though, right? So it doesn't really matter. I did say that sarcastically for anyone listening. I'm not being serious.
Yes. So I had issues with because I just don't agree. And I think another state president that you may have had would have
I mean, it's always leadership where you let, you know, where people's boundaries are. And again, I don't blame him personally. I'm a bit frustrated because if he, you know, he went on and on about how he's read every word that I've written twice, you know, but all he could come up with from that was lists of the words I said that offended him. That's what he was looking for, not I've just presented you. Why are you not having a faith crisis right now, or at least getting a bit concerned?
Yeah, he probably switched off to a lot of it.
You're not noticing that you've just been listening to talks in general conference in which people lied to you and us. But that's not the important thing. So it comes down to, in effect, and this is the Pharisee tool, this is the mind control tool, the big brother tool, is you are more upset that you call someone a liar than that they lied. The crime is calling it out. The crime is labeling it. I think I can't remember, there's a quote from the guy who sort of blew the whistle and is hiding out in Russia now or whatever, along the lines of, when speaking the truth is about leaders is a crime, that's who the criminals are. And so it was just that, but again, great, because this speaks to the problems in the church I'm dealing with. They literally modeled it in the trial itself. They proved the points over and over again. Yeah, and as Nemo said, so they've absolutely, in a sense, and I knew this would happen at some point, so I'm not trying to get on this. This stake president is one of the wokest ever in history. He's thoughtful, he's diligent, he's done amazing things for LGBTQ inclusion in our stake. But another thing I pointed out to them all is, look, you guys are good at identifying vulnerable groups. You're great with the disabled, the depressed, the mentally ill, the LGBTQ people. But what you're missing is the most vulnerable group in our religion, bar none, numerically and everything. For every one of those people we might lose if we don't meet their needs, you are going to lose 10 people in faith crisis. The vulnerable group are the people who haven't been taught the real history of the church or what the leaders are up to, in a system where we can't hold them accountable at the moment, even though we should. And when they find out that system is broken, that the leaders are robbing them, and that they've been lied to in countless ways and are still being lied to, then their testimony will crash. You are not protecting them. You haven't got a committee working on their needs. Because in our culture, as soon as you say anything's wrong, you become the enemy. You don't become a vulnerable group to nurture. You don't become people you have a duty of care to. As soon as you become a dissident, you're an anti-Mormon, you're apostate. You get told to your face, you're a danger, you're a threat, and we have to get you out of here as quickly as possible because you're going to infect other people. It's your fault.
Journey is inevitable. There's only one way it goes.
Can I just say something really quick? Again, it's probably pointless, but I just feel I need to get it out of my head.
Go on.
So I was just thinking, as you were saying there about, the fact that you calling them a liar and you're being disciplined for that. But how would it go if you stood up in church and taught something that was complete lies, complete nonsense, but you really taught it as, what would happen to you? You'd be huckled huckled into the bishop's office. You would.
Well, no, not even that.
The leaders are allowed to do it.
Yeah. But part of my point is, we get people who get up and talk utter garbage in lessons. They teach nonsense. They teach outdated, inaccurate stuff as religion, and they give talks and testimonies in which they'll say the craziest stuff that's not theologically accurate. But as long as their punchline is, and that's why I know the church is true, and this is the only true and living church, and President Nelson is a prophet, aren't we lucky to have him? It literally doesn't matter what garbage just came out of their mouth. Homophobic stuff, whatever, no one is going to put them in front of a court of love. Because the
court of love thing. Alana, could you read the excellent question that that someone sent? And it was our friend of the show, Debbie Shrub, who sent us a really great question that I'd love you to take a look at it. And we want to talk about 21st century excommunication, 21st century church discipline. Do you have a copy of that question there, Alana?
Yeah, I've got it here, yep. I'm looking right at it. So she says, it isn't a specific question for Peter. This was also what she wrote in the thing. She said, my question as an unbelieving Mormon is about moral integrity and excommunication. My question is, how can we maintain or even justify our personal integrity when we align ourselves with an organisation that practices something as fundamentally unkind and cruel as excommunication? My name is still on the records, but excommunication as a continued practice is the main prompt for me considering resigning my membership.
Well, let's change the name. Let's not call it excommunication. I guess that's the first thing. So it's a church membership council. So are you fine
membership
with that
withdrawal? Membership
that's,
withdrawal.
That's the one. So we should all be okay with that, right?
Yeah, it sounds milder.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's a really important question, and I'm in this weird position of trying to be fully aware of the full scale of the problems here. You know, and this is kind of what I'm trying to prove as well. This is why I'm using the strong, robust language. I'm modeling for people being absolutely as angry as it is possible to be, outraged at the leaders letting me down and being very disillusioned with the first presidency. You know, that these are all categories of anger that people who leave the church achieve. And it's easy to get to these points. It doesn't take much. And who is aware of the financial corruption. And I'm saying, yes, I feel your pain. I'm saying it. Yes, it's completely outrageous. There aren't strong enough words for this scale of betrayal. You know, the stuff I'm saying is mild for what these people deserve, because no one else has hurt my family like these people have. No one else has hurt my friends like the general authorities of the LDS Church have. The things they've perpetuated, taught, and done have hurt my family more than any politician, than any criminal. You know, I mean, we've had a lucky life so far. These people have done more to directly harm my relationships with my siblings and my parents and my children and our well-being and our mental health and our spirituality. They have committed religious, spiritual, intellectual, whatever abuse. They've exercised unrighteous dominion. Frankly, the words I've used are really restraining myself, because a very long stream of F words should at least be the first sentence to do justice to the scale of pain and murder. They've driven people to suicide with their words. They've taken lives, and they know it. People have told them over and over again, and why and what they're saying is doing this. They know it, and they still say it. There's no level of language that is too much for that, surely, ethically, you know, talking about the ethics. So I'm saying, yes, I'm going to own all of that pain, all of that anger, but I'm going to say at the end of it, still, I want to stay being a Latter-day Saint, because I think we can fix this thing. It's going to be hard work, and it's going to take radical reform that a lot of you are completely incapable of even imagining. But maybe when you stare at your ward being about to disappear and your kids are going to leave the church, maybe at that point you might become desperate enough to get real and have a reality check. And we've got about 3 years for that to happen, 5 years tops. If it doesn't, it's toast. Bye-bye. We're done here. There's nothing left anyway to save. But if you want,
I think people live in their little bubble and don't believe that that's ever going to happen, because we're taught that the Lord will never remove the church from the earth again.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
and they
so
think
people
it's
live in that bubble
invincible.
of it.
Yeah. And as I've mentioned before, when you get Patrick Mason on, the question I'd love you to ask him, because he is so right. I love his book. I listened to it on audio yesterday. He actually mirrors most of what I'm saying in the podcast. He gets it. This is a guy who's always got it. But his one fundamental error, in my opinion, is he keeps saying the church is here to stay. He thinks they've got years and years and years to gradually continue making reforms. And he talks about 2 new generations. He says the next 2 generations of this church are going to make a new creation, and we don't even know what it will look like. And it's lovely. It's like this hopeful, pretty bluebirds, let the children do their thing. But it's completely delusional, because there won't be a church for the next generation. We're not even holding on to this one. We don't have them anymore. 80% of them left, and the kids coming out of primary now, most of them are going to leave in the next few years. A few of them in their 20s, but most of them will leave in the next few years. So
how many kids did we have in primary, Jane, recently? Before they brought some more people into the ward? Very few, right?
Yeah, we have none.
And youth, we had what? 1 young woman at one point. Obviously, there was some due to come up, but very, very few. Very, very few.
So that's the thing, and here's the difference in what I'm doing, and this is it in a nutshell. and why I just got excommunicated, but probably had to. The major difference between someone like Patrick Mason, who gets it, he knows we have to make these changes. Although another thing to pick him up on, at no point in the whole book did he mention LGBTQ people. He mentions the refugees as vulnerable people, racial minorities, women. He went through the whole list. Nowhere did he breathe a single word about LGBTQ people while talking about vulnerable groups being preached against at church. He knows they're there. He left them out intentionally because he doesn't want to upset the leaders. He's stuck with the vulnerable groups that the general authorities have been nicer to. Challenge him about that. But anyway, so the difference is he thinks he's got all the time in the world, so he doesn't have to call out the leadership. He just needs to wait for younger leaders to come in or new generations. The gradual evolution of the church. He's thinking in terms of centuries. That's what he was talking about. And that's what the Givens do. And that's what all these other neo-Mormon apologists do, is they never directly challenge the leaders because they assume they're going to die in a few years and get eventually replaced by someone a bit more woke. So they don't have to fight that battle. It will just happen by itself. And they've got decades to bring about this change. The difference with me is that I've clued up about that, and I'm not, the real data and our experience in the international church where they don't live, they live in the bubble. We know we don't have those years.
Yeah.
We won't. There will be no church in 10 years in our country, or 20 years. There won't be in Europe. There won't be in Latin America. It's worse in Latin America. They've got zero growth there. Massive inactivity because of stupid baseball baptism practices. And Utah is starting to lose members. So I've crossed the line because I've realized our only hope, the only way, is to radically challenge the leaders. They have to change. They have to stop saying this stuff, and they have to do it before they die. These leaders are going to have to do it if it's going to happen in time. And they are going to have to be bullied into it, shamed into it, argued into it. And we're going to have to create a groundswell of opinion among the members to make that happen sooner rather than waiting for it to sort of happen by itself in the future. We're going to have to fight for it. Otherwise, it won't happen in time. And there will be no church left in Britain.
Yeah,
That's the difference.
You've crossed the line.
Yeah.
Alana and I had a great chat earlier on. We had lots of fun with this, but I am going to do this sort of the true believing Mormon philosophy. Actually, you know what? I think part of me, this is probably deep down how I may feel. I don't know. Let's see where this goes. So if you've crossed the line and you knew that you were going to cross the line, it's the church's game, it's the church's ball. If it doesn't want you to play with that ball, it can take it away. It sets the rules. Most importantly, if you have made covenants with God, okay, so not as much as we can argue it's with the church or whatever, if you've made covenants with God, what we want to do is we want to release you from those covenants, to release you from that obligation that you have made, and let you work on all of those things that you want to work on, that you feel really strongly about it. Lots of good luck with that. We're really enjoying reading your podcast. We can watch your podcast. But those covenants and that obligation that you're under now from God, we're going to release you from that. 21st century excommunication is an act of love. Talk to me, guys. Talk to me.
So the idea then is that you're no longer hanging yourself. It's like what they used to say to black people. Aren't you lucky that you can't go to the temple or hold the priesthood? Because these covenants, they're quite serious, If you screw up and mess up on your temple covenants, you're in extreme danger of hellfire. And so you're very lucky that you don't have to take upon these risks that the white people are taking on. They literally used to say this to them. So you don't, where much is given, much is required, but you're very lucky because you don't have very much required of you. I mean, it's just that, isn't it? And that is what how they frame.
Yeah, I mean,
you go away and repent now. Think again. Go on the naughty step for a bit. you're not in trouble, you know, in a sense, because you haven't made promises to God after all, and you can just start over. I mean, when you really analyze that, it's just ludicrous, isn't it? The whole thing is patronizing nonsense. Go on.
Alana, it's an act of love.
It is not. That is absolute garbage, in my opinion. Like, so I'm not wanting to talk too much about mine, but obviously I've been excommunicated and rebaptized. But, you know, my instance, you know, it was more kind of sin related, not living up to my covenants, you know, living in sin, living with a partner, etc., etc. I've never experienced it as being, and I mean, it is still classed as apostasy, right? But not in the same way as you, you know. And don't get me wrong, as I said, those were people I loved who were sitting in front of me. And like they said that they felt it would be in my best interest and it would benefit me more to be excommunicated. Now, I'm not going to lie, I did almost feel like a weight had been lifted off my shoulder. But now looking back, I realise that that's because all the guilt and shame that I carried because of a church, because of them. So if that was never there in the first place, I would never have had to feel that release. I don't really believe that it is, what did you say it was? It was out of love. I think I'm trying to recall what I said to you, Jane. I say things in the moment and then I forget. Like,
you just
I don't feel it. I don't feel that it's of my train of thought's gone. What were you saying?
I don't feel that it's of God.
But I'm trying to say, like, I don't feel that it's out of love because I don't believe this is God's way. I do not believe that God wants to punish his children in such a horrible, I can't even find the words, like, just horrible. Again, I feel like I'm quoting John Dillon here, barbaric. You know, I do. Like, the more I think about it, it's awful. And again, going back to, you know, I had to sit in there with a room of 4 or 5 men on my own as a woman. I would never, ever do that again, looking back. But I just think, how dare they say that they do this in the name of God? How dare they? Because the God I believe in wouldn't have this. Wouldn't. And that's my opinion.
And very few people come back after that. They think it's this pathway back for repentance. Very few come back. I think there is a place for excommunication where people have egregiously hurt a victim. I think it's a sign that the church does not approve, is not happy with this, where you've really harmed someone, where you've committed child abuse or whatever, something like that. But consenting adults doing stuff or having an opinion, you know, it just doesn't work. It backfires. And so many, I've mercifully, I've only sat in, I think, 2 church disciplines sort of as a ward clerk taking notes. And both of them was one was kind of framed in a loving way and may have sort of worked for that person. The other one, they're never coming back. You know, that's it. The bridges have been burnt. And so it's a very blunt instrument. It's used far too much. And as soon as it begins, people get into, they kind of take on roles. This is why I sort of challenge my guys to think about what's going on. That you kind of follow a script that is set for you without really thinking of the harm you're doing here. I know people they do take it seriously. I've talked to, and a lot of them kid themselves. It's a lovely, warm, fuzzy experience. I've spoken to bishops and high councillors who say, oh, I really felt the Spirit was so, you know, we were so gracious and loving. It's like, no, that's in your head. You've got a traumatized person in front of you. And when they reflect on what just happened, they're not going to be grateful for this, because I've talked to them and that's what they said. And, you know, and it is this perpetuation of a patriarchal, patronizing, you know, we will generously sort of make these decisions for you. We're going to judge you. We're going to assert our power over you, but we'll pretend we're doing it for your good rather than our own ego and to tickle our fancy, and which often it too much is. And I think bishops do this a lot with young people when they're counseling them and helping them to stop masturbating or sort out their chastity. They think they've achieved a great victory. They feel they've laid a massive guilt trip on some poor 13-year-old. They've put them through hell, traumatized them, as they'll realize later if they don't already. And yeah, I know better than you do. Yeah. And they've felt the Spirit because they've administered Christ's love and think they fixed that kid, and they've gone into the world cleansed and lifted of this burden. Of course they haven't. All the kid has learned is never to confess to you again. You know, you think they're fixed. No one is fixed of having sexuality. It doesn't go away just because you intervened after some pornography use. They're just not going to tell you about it ever again, and they will learn to lie, and most of them will leave. Most of the 80% of the kids who leave the church do it in their young.
Because again, it goes back to that feeling of shame
start shaming
and
them.
guilt,
Yeah.
and all the things you feel like you're not good enough. All the things that
Yeah.
I've talked about before that I felt growing up, you always feel not good enough. You carry that shame, and I think it needs to stop. They're not trained professionals.
No.
And again, I never seen anything wrong with that growing up because it was the norm for me. But now looking at it, I would never allow my daughter to be in a bishop's office the way I was. And that's part of the reason I walked away from church, because I don't want her going through all of the stuff and the guilt and the shame that I've had to carry my whole life. Sorry, I'm getting a bit...
And I'm processing the same. Yeah.
You see, so there are a couple of things that I really want to hit, you know, before we close out tonight, and I think it's really important to acknowledge, you know, both Alana and I, we knew way back when this was a possibility that if you were going to be excommunicated, that, you know, this was going to be this was going to be tough for us. Never mind tough for you. We were like, oh my goodness, what's it going to do to me?
You've got too much empathy, ladies. You need to be more like the blokes.
I do.
It's much easier not to care, honestly.
Nemo pointed out that
just don't have it in me.
We need to stiff up our lip. Yeah. It's our Celtic, you know, feelings.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it takes such an emotional toll, and although great things can come of it, which is a huge thing. I know what I'm saying, something that's very controversial there. Alana had an experience where, had that not happened in your life, you know, it led to some incredible things that you were able to then go and deal with. That is purely incidental. I would like to think those things could have happened without it at some point, and so it was all what I'm inclined to remember as you've been going through this is when my mother-in-law, her husband suddenly died while they were on holiday, and I remember as she was coming back alone into her house, we could hear the sound of her being carried down the street, just this wail, you know, in the middle of the night. And it was a haunting sound. When a few weeks ago we were watching what happened with Natasha Helfer's excommunication, I remember she was preparing for that same sound that she was making, this keening sound that was coming from her soul. In the 21st century, although we can use different terminology, it is still an archaic and barbaric practice that wrecks people, absolutely wrecks people. And you have coped with this with dignity and grace and humor, and it has been wonderful to see. And I'm so proud to know you. You know, we are to be your friend.
Thank you.
So thank you for the grace that you've shown during this, and the example that you continue to show. Now, our audience want to know what's happening next. You've already mentioned that you are you're going to appeal. That's already started, right?
Yeah. So I've got 30 days, I think, to do that. I need to write that tomorrow and get it in the post. So I will be appealing to the First Presidency, which and in a way, all of this becomes performance art. This becomes, you know, it's a system. So I'm going to play the system. I turned up with a funny hat. You know, I empowered myself so it would be a different experience. This is a wonderful opportunity. I'm going to get to write to the First Presidency, point out that leaders, you know, if we do what they tell us to and ask our local leaders to answer our questions and deal with these concerns, they don't have the answers or they won't engage. We know already that if you write to general authorities, they always pass it back down to your state president. So they won't deal with anything, and they usually won't give the state president any help with what to even say to you. So it's all about control. It's not about actually meeting your needs or answering your questions. They're not willing to do that, and they don't have the answers, obviously. They're out there on the internet in the church in Exile. They'll give you all the answers. If you've got a question about anything, they've got the answer. And so I'm going to be asking them, so guys, Doctrine and Covenants 2065 says that we're meant to vote before you ordain yourselves as the first presidency. What's your take on this? Because my stake president wouldn't answer me.
Can you
Secondly,
imagine? You're like, Peter, we didn't even notice. Who forgot to?
I know. I'm going to fix them. I'm going to fix them. This is great. And then the second question will be,
I mean, you really would go down in history.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I know you've robbed us of $300 billion. I'm mostly concerned about this paltry $5 million that the people in my ward gave to the Perpetual Education Fund and the International Humanitarian Aid Fund. Why has none of that been spent for 5 years? Why is it just earning you more money you don't need in interest in a bank account? And third, since I found out about these things and that you are not really the first presidency and you're robbing us and you keep lying, I might throw in a few examples of their lying. I needed to do that. Yeah, I should put that in. It's going to take me 2 days. And these lying things where you're lying, what is it appropriate for me as a Melchizedek priesthood holder who's covenanted to protect my people from such dangers to do in response? Am I allowed to speak about it publicly, or do you have an alternate path I should follow? I asked my stake president, he wouldn't tell me. Would you like to tell me? Because he just decided to excommunicate me rather than answering those questions and dealing with this reality. You know,
My thoughts on that last question are, but you're the one who's been led astray and deceived by Satan, Peter.
Yeah.
Not
I know.
us.
So tell me what to do differently in front of these actual facts that Satan didn't trick me into believing, because they're real facts, you know, and here's the evidence. You know, you were there, you said those lies, so you know it's true. You know, so that will be a great letter. I'm going to really enjoy writing that, and the stake president will forward that to them, and then we'll see if I get an answer, and I'll do that very publicly. So it becomes performance art. So the future is the campaign for reform continues. I don't have to do it for long, because if they don't reform in the next 5 years, my church will cease to exist in 10. I literally won't have anywhere to go to Mormon church left. So it's a short-term commitment. I'm not, I don't have to make like a lifelong suffering here. And if it works, though, that's great. I can be part of the reforms that are going to follow.
Can I ask, while you're thinking about this, what is it like to be excommunicated, Peter?
I think, in a way, I haven't experienced that because I have not excommunicated myself. I don't acknowledge their power to do that to me. The Doctrine and Covenants 121 is very clear. The second leaders in the church exercise unrighteous dominion, which is defined as covering their sins, so that's lying, and hiding truth from us, which I'm calling them out for. Exercising their pride, exercising control over other people in any degree of unrighteousness, God withdraws their priesthood authority. Amen to the priesthood or the authority of that man. So in my opinion, that was an unjust act. They haven't even followed their own procedures. They didn't engage with the reasons I'm saying it. And yeah, I'll join you, Doug, for Zoom church. I'm busy being at my one, annoying people.
This is what I asked about too.
I was just sitting thinking, Peter, there as you talked about the letter to the first presidency, and I'm sitting thinking, they'll be thinking, if it was possible to excommunicate you for a second thing, I think that quite possibly could happen.
They'll probably get the satisfaction of signing that letter. They may even sign it personally rather than having a machine do it, which would be quite an honour. My mission call was signed by a machine on behalf of a president of the church in a coma, so they have the machine.
Oh,
but anyway, so it will be that. So in a sense, I've not felt that sense of separation and devastation. Yes. Because I've not allowed them to do that to me. As far as I'm concerned, I'm, I know they don't officially recognize it. I don't care. I'm a Latter-day Saint. I'm going to be living my standards. I'm not going on a drunken heroin binge anytime soon. I'm going to still wear my garments. Why not say that? They're still on. They can't take my underwear from me.
How dare you?
Woo!
How very dare you? Get them off, sir. You're not allowed to wear them.
Come and try. You're going to take my underwear off me? Really? Do you want to go there? So you know, this is
it's
me and
only
God.
with you. I've done so much face palm in interviews with you. No one else. Alana and I do not sustain or ratify the decision made
Oh,
by
thank you
your
very
state
much.
presidency. So
Yeah.
you're a Schiller brother. So what we wanted to ask, I mean, I wanted to ask this all Sunday, and I've deliberately held it off. What was church like for you this Sunday?
Right. So church was, in a sense, proved my point. We only had about 10 people. So
how were those people with you? Do they know that
oh,
you've
they were fine. Oh
excommunicated?
no, everyone. No, I think some of them knew that they're just lovely. You know, I
Okay.
love my people. I adore them. They know what I'm like. It's all just Peter doing a silly thing, and I'm very close to the gospel doctrine teacher. So I made some points. They were talking. I can't remember what it was, but I was just giving useful factual information to help the lesson along. Nothing controversial. And I think the teacher's been told, only to step in if I'm being out of order. If I'm making them feel uncomfortable, then they can slap me down and say, "Shush, you've been excommunicated" or something. But I'll try and be a good boy. No, it was weird. It was the first time I couldn't take the sacrament. And what happened? What I knew would happen happened, which is the bishopric member passing the sacrament offered me the sacrament, because I knew they'd do that. And then he was like, oh, sorry, he remembered, but he, and that's going to happen.
That was a purposeful thing, or no? Is it not in him?
No, he just forgot. But I totally forgive them, because I've done it a million times. Like the number of times I've offered the sacrament when I'm, passing the sacrament as a deacon or whatever to someone I know is not meant to have it. So I've clocked up about 100 of those. So after they do it to me 100 times, then I'm allowed to get annoyed. But it's going to keep happening. So that was kind of the first,
and especially
moment.
In such a small ward, it's more noticeable then, isn't it?
It's going to make them uncomfortable. It's going to make them uncomfortable. And I experienced that for the first time,
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. This Sunday was the first experience of me being able to get out to church for 18 months. We've been in an extended lockdown, due to my son.
Yeah.
And I got to have sacrament for the first time in 18 months, and it was, it felt pretty powerful. Comparing that with the first time that you haven't, Peter, were you okay with that?
I am. I think again, I can reflect on Christ in my heart if I want to make a thing of it. Mostly, I just tried not to think about it this time. I've got my little notebook and doodle book, and I did some doodles and just let it flow over me. So we'll see how that feels long term. I've not been one to overdo the sacrament thing, hello.
Hi, Daisy.
Can I just tell you what she just said to me? Like, she was asking when we were finishing up. I was like, we
know,
shouldn't be too long. She's like,
too long.
Is that Peter again? Chatting. From the mouth of babes.
Well, here's the thing. We've been going for 2.5 hours.
I know, but it's been needed to be said, though.
Which is how long I had my trial for. Think about that. All that time we've just had. Can you imagine the ball I was having? Not in a gloaty way, but just how cool that was. Bless my stake leadership for doing that. Yeah. They gave me this much time to say their bit, but also to ask lots of really great questions that I was able to address and sort of discuss why I'm doing this and what matters and maybe what the way forward is for us all. I got heard. I came out of their feeling. I said everything I wanted to say, which for me is incredible, obviously, because it goes on a bit. And that was brilliant. So anyone planning to continue doing these stupid things, do it that way. Give everyone plenty of time to say their bit, particularly if it's an apostasy trial. Usually if it's about adultery or something, there's no argument. It's just, yeah, you've done this, we'll be compassionate. It's a different kettle of fish, though. When it's apostasy, you've committed a thought crime. Your thoughts are being put on trial, and you need to give people time to express their thoughts and to justify their thoughts so that justice can be done. And that's what the High Council are there for, to check that you have had a fair hearing and that the church's point of view has had a fair hearing. So I'd just say, make that space. and we can have these difficult conversations. And it's okay if we get a bit tetchy with each other and emotional and heated and cross and impatient. That's okay. The roof doesn't fall in. We got through it, and we still love each other, and there was hugs afterwards, you know. So it's we can have these difficult conversations at church without breaking the church. But where can we have them normally? Nowhere. I had to wait for my excommunication trial to have my one, to actually have that conversation with state leaders focused on why is the church crashing and what we're going to do about it. I had to go through all this to get that conversation to happen.
Yeah. The next thing that I really wanted to make sure that we discussed tonight. So when we really wanted to speak to you last week after your email came in. Now we are so nobody has had, I don't think, the pleasure of hearing Lynn yet on a podcast.
Yes.
Your wife, Lynn.
Yeah.
Lynn is wonderful. I mean, she's got you well taken care of. So I'm aware that you know that you are being well supported by Lynn, and she's just perfect.
Oh,
We want to.
Lynn is a very, very, very impatient person.
So waiting a week for that email would have been horrible for her.
Yeah. Well, apart from that, impatient with me mostly. So for her to have let the house and the garden go to absolute hell over the last 4 months, and for me not to be constantly doing busy work sorting her disheveled house out in order to write and record these podcasts, to put almost everything on hold, every spare minute I've got, in order to do this, has been an incredible gift to me, for which I will pay dearly for many years. She will never forgive me for this.
Good.
And it will be mentioned often. So the guilt is going to be epic. I am going to suffer for this 10 times over. But the fact that she's done that for her is an incredible gift, and I really do owe it all to her. And
yeah, she is wonderful.
She's wonderful. She's
and
a hoot.
We wanted to sort of be there to, you know, help Lynn, and that if there's any wounds that needed binding in that night, that we were sort of, you know, just around to be able to talk, and, you know, to be able to bless you and you know, show our love for both of you. When we were speaking with you that night, you said something that I feel like is going to be part of my journey. You said something so good, and you talked about the church in exile. Could you talk about that tonight? I want to know about that.
So for a start, numerically, for pretty much for every active member of the church in Britain, there are 8 inactive members. And that's inactive, not even excommunicated. This is on the church's membership record still. And as we've talked about, in the past, they just disappear and you kind of never hear from them again. But over the last couple of decades, that a lot of them are still there on the fringes. They've hung around. They're processing their pain. You don't walk away from a high demand fundamentalist religion. You just don't. You take it with you, all that conditioning for good and for bad, all that experience. And they are so generous, these people who've often been really hurt by the church and its members. They nearly always acknowledge profoundly the good, the love that they had, the good things in their upbringing in the church. They haven't become bitter and twisted, hostile monsters. They absolutely know all that good was there, but there was too much harm as well. And they have to process that. It will take them a lifetime. It's going to impact everything. It's going to give them guilt trips whenever they reach for a cup of coffee or have a sexual relationship or whatever. The church will be in the room with them. Absolutely. And there's a lot to process there. And so they love this religion on a level and its people. They care about it deeply. And now social media means they have a place to talk about it. It's good for them because they get the free therapy of being in these groups, of talking about these issues, of dealing with it. It's great. There are a lot of groups out there to do that with. They will get validation. They will get comfort from knowing, yes, literally thousands of other people went through this and arrived at the same place. I'm not evil because I did this. I'm not the broken one. The system, sadly, is broken, and it broke all of us. So that's part of the church in exile. But what I'm trying to communicate back to anyone listening to my podcast is the wisdom they can give us. They are us. They've done everything we've done. They've served as long as we have. They've been members for as long as any of us have, and still left. And they've been through it all, and there is a hive mind wisdom there. They will talk about the issues and they will work out the solutions. If the revelation isn't coming to our leaders, which sadly it clearly isn't, all they can get revelations about is logos and stopping having a Saturday session of conference, then deciding to put it back on again, and saying they're going to preserve the Salt Lake Temple, then destroying it, and then saying they're going to destroy the Manti Temple, then deciding to preserve it. Flip-flop after flip-flop, and do the November policy and then reverse it. It's not been a great track record the last 20 years. And then tell us all we've got to say I'm a Mormon and have logos and floods Facebook, and then say it's a victory to Satan to say you're a Mormon, you are offending Jesus. That it's chaos. So what they're offering is nonsense. Obviously, that is all ridiculous, and people are seeing through it. But what the people who have left, they're having the revelations. They've had the revelation of the truth. They've got the message. They can teach it back to us. They can speak prophetically. Here's how to save your church. Do you want to save your church? If you want to save your church, here's how to do it. End sexual shaming. Ordain women. LGBTQ inclusion. Common consent. Get rid of this dictatorship of 15 geriatric men. There's nothing in the scriptures that the oldest dying man has to lead the church. That was never how it started.
That's one of the biggest problems, in my opinion.
Well, not one of the biggest, but for me,
in that sense of that.
They can't. It's impossible.
They're not living in the 21st century because they're old men.
Yeah. Well, they're literally.
They don't get it.
They're nearly a century old, and
if the church in exile looks like you. If if that's how you described, how you feel.
I'm not necessarily typical, but yeah.
Well, because there isn't then a typical church in exile member or non-member. Surely then it becomes, if we can talk about Big Tent Mormonism, the church in exile must be massive. What if it is for people who maybe don't want to save the church organization at all? What if it's the people who still go and show up every week and they are silenced? And they, what if it's the people who feel voiceless, like you? The people who are forbidden to speak up? What if it's the people like, you, Alana? And I'd wanted to ask you that question tonight. Is the church in exile something that you could identify with?
At this point, I don't really know.
Yeah,
because I'm just still figuring a lot of things out.
Yeah.
You're in it, Alana. This is it.
Yeah. I guess I feel like I'm in it, but I'm not in it, if that makes any sense, because I'm not there. I'm not able to be there and voice how I'm feeling or voice my concerns or...
Yeah, but the church in exile is about not necessarily being there either. Now, I wanted to share this really cool thing that I was having a look at today, and it was about John of the New Testament, who he was in exile. His visions of, it was this really cool article, and it's actually an Ensign article that was talking about why was he sent into exile? Seemingly it was because of his testimony, but why would that be? And if the people at the time, the religious leaders at the time, saw that John's understanding of who God is not the one that was generally accepted. There is this incredible quote in our scriptures about how God describes or how God blesses John. He says, "I will make him as flaming fire." Isn't that beautiful? The idea of a church in exile fills me with excitement, and I look forward to seeing how it looks.
And in a sense, it's not an organized church, but it is a supportive community. And they recognize very clearly, and John Delin's talked about this a lot, it is pretty much impossible to replicate. And I was chatting, it's impossible to replicate a Mormon ward, unfortunately, in a secular setting. You can't. It requires some ingredients that to some extent can be unhealthy as well, like obligation and guilt and so on, to make people turn up and do stuff. And we can certainly find ways to be more healthy with that. But I was chatting to a friend for quite a while this morning who's been out of the church for 30 years, but she still cares. She's reconnected. She's following all this stuff. She went on a mission. She is, again, part of this community that care. And she wants to help the fight, you know, and whatever, and get informed about what's going on, because it's still a part of her. And we discussed this, of how she hasn't been able to find a similar community outside. But what we agreed with, if you're doing that, you just have to work harder. You have to find it in a few places, which she did. She found it in social action groups. She found it in clubs. She found, or whatever it was that she's discovered, and friendship groups at work. So you have to kind of rebuild those ingredients in your life and find purpose and passion. And so the people who are just not coming back to church are seeking that thing they do feel they've lost. They've lost that sense of community and intimate interaction and purpose. They wouldn't necessarily trust the church to come and find it here again. I hope one day we can make it safe for them to do so. But yeah, so I'm not saying that the church in exile is an alternate church or a rival church.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it is part of our community. They are part of Mormonism. We have also the community of Christ, our cousin Mormons, who are doing all kinds of things really well and other things badly. You know, they're struggling too. They're not growing very fast, although they are more in the developing world. But they've dealt with a lot of the demons we took too long to get to. They dealt with polygamy and racism almost immediately, and they've already pioneered ordaining women and LGBT inclusion in the last couple of years. So we can learn from them. So my view is the church in exile are a source of wisdom, a source of the voice of revelation and prophecy, if you want, because they've lived it, they've experienced it. God has spoken to them. Truth is from God, the God of truth, the spirit of truth, reality check, whatever you want to call it. And so if we will just talk to these people and learn from them, I've learned from them how to have hope again. It's hard to find because a lot of them are just very cross and are mostly chewing on all these problems. And each month, the leadership of the church give everyone another outrage to get cross about. You know, you can get distracted by that. That's kind of Donald Trump's tactic. Never be held accountable, because you're always saying something crazy the next day to the press that everyone has to talk to, and it constantly distracts people. So I'm trying to not get, I love the juicy, I mean, it's like, really? They said that? Oh, I'm typing about that. You know, it is tempting, but I'm trying to overall have the bigger picture of how do we fix this thing. And these people are ready. God has prepared them, if you want to look at it that way. They've got the answers. They've already done the research and rewritten the history to be accurate. They've already, and they're willing to talk about it. Our historians know the true history, but they're heavily edited before we ever receive any of it from them still. Like the Saints books are better, but still it's a one interpretation of everything. They will tell us how to change our culture. They will tell us you've got to stop the endless shaming about how long your sleeves are, and the Pharisaical nonsense, judging people by appearance and intensively policing their sexuality and persecuting them really in those interviews, which we start with the young, and for the strength of youth tells everyone to do that. Like, it has to go. Read that book. If you're an adult and you don't think you've got problems in your church, read For the Strength of Youth. Anyway, so, and change that culture. Be honest about the history, but and then we can get and bring back democracy. Give the people control, because they're modeling it for us in these communities where they can speak freely rather than be excommunicated for it. They are having the difficult conversations. The fully TBM, active, true believing Mormons are talking to the dissidents and the excommunicated. They're learning from each other. They're challenging each other. They're discussing ideas freely. And in the marketplace of ideas, they are arriving at shared consensus of wisdom. This is a way forward that would work. This is how to do this with integrity. This is what stands up to the criticism of real history and being tested at the chalk face of truth, whatever you want to call it. They've already done the hard work, so we can learn it from them wholesale. That means we can change in 5 years. We can't, because they've got the answers already. We can't wait for geriatric presidencies to do it, because they never will, and they've said they don't have to. They think they're fine and we're not allowed to question them. They're infallible. But we can, if we learn from these people. You could put a whole program in place easily within 5 years, transform this church into something that will not just survive, but will win the 21st century, that can grow again, because we will be reaching people's needs and relevant and exciting, and we'll have these unique Mormon doctrines that we offer to fix Christianity.
Absolutely.
That's what they've got. Go find it. Talk to these people. They're amazing.
The exciting thing for me is that when you speak to your stake president about what will happen next if you are excommunicated, he sees the threat, and yet we're talking tonight about the possibilities of being an exciting, vibrant, dynamic, responsive, changing, adapting, growing, living space. That is so cool. Scott Brandon, you made an awesome comment there about, you bringing up in priesthood how many members are talking to you about their faith crisis. And I just think the more that you create a space where people can do that, people can shoot you down all they like, but being that safe person, I just think it makes such a difference.
That is something anyone in any ward can do. You be that, and I've found that's helped me, and that I've been able to help others. Just that one of the most basic human needs is to know that someone else understands, that someone else gets you. And I gave a quite controversial talk before I really got into all of this, at my sister's ward in Cornwall, in which I was talking about the Pharisee Christian thing dynamic, and how a lot of what we're doing as a culture is not healthy and is more the Pharisee thing. And I kind of had to run out of town. Like, the bishop there phoned me on the way out of Cornwall to say if I'd been in his ward, he'd have excommunicated me for what I said. I've been doing this for a while, and it really was like, quick skedaddle, get across the border into Devon where we're safe. But here's the other bit of the hope, because I've had that happen before, where I've said that sort of thing and had a negative reaction initially from a stake president or someone. Next time I spoke to that guy, he basically repeated back to me everything I'd said, and he had a completely different attitude. He was basically parroting the points I had been making. And the same happened with the stake president, who hauled me in after I gave a presentation years ago at a stake priesthood training. And he kind of raked me over the coals, and because I'd criticized the baseball baptisms and other things, and then within 3 years, he, as stake president, was teaching everything I'd presented at that thing, because he'd learned, he's caught up. I'm obviously right about everything. This is what everyone needs to work out. Right? No, but here's the hope. Here's the point. I think we can change the Pharisees. They're convertible, because we teach two religions in our church. We don't just teach the Pharisee nonsense of control and policing the tithing of the mint and the herbs and obsessing over the number of earrings. Yes, we teach that religion, but we also teach Christ's religion. We study the Gospels. We study the message of the Book of Mormon, that God is for all people, and he speaks to people in every nation, kindred, and tongue, that we can learn from those people. We also learn unconditional love, self-sacrifice, compassion, patience, kindness, all the good stuff in section 121, gentle persuasion, how to really be good leaders through love and persuasion and truth, not authoritarianism, not do this because of my priesthood ordination, not because of my patriarchy, but because I love you and what I'm saying makes sense. I have reasoned with you. I've given you a rational faith that you can believe and trust. And all we need to do is give all of these people permission to realize there's a difference, because at the moment they think it's all the same religion. The people who will bring you a meal and be patient with you when you're in trouble will excommunicate you for saying some rude words. The same people. The people who will be totally compassionate to LGBTQ people and inclusive will be completely hostile and negative about dissidents who dare to speak truth to power. Because we're living both religions. So this is why my podcast is Christians versus Pharisees. It's a war. Let's separate them. Work out in your own head what the difference is, what the Christians do, what the Pharisees do, how they respond totally differently to every situation. If a young person walks into a dance with, not that we have dances anymore, with a skimpy dress on, the Christian is going to embrace them, welcome them, and be incredibly glad that a teenager just came to a church event
And not go,
and want to be their friend. The Pharisee will think they're serving God and helping that person by having the first thing that comes out of their mouth, "I'm sorry, dear, what you're wearing isn't appropriate. Could you go and get something else? Or if you want to come in here, I'll give you a cardigan to cover your porn shoulders." And that's the first message. That's all you need to make this point, because we've seen both as Mormons over and over again. And we've seen how the one that was welcome stayed and the one that was judged for her clothing never came to a church dance again. We've seen that for decades. We keep making the same stupid mistakes over and over again. And we never learn because we're not allowed to critically analyze and identify that difference. So what I'm trying to do is say, yes, there's a war. There always has been since the pre-existence. Let's own it. And you've got goodies and you've got baddies. Sometimes they're the same people. This is a war within our own souls. This is a war in our community. And it's always been there. It's part of the human condition. And I just want to kind of finish by reading one of the paragraphs from my decision letter. Your character, because in a way I'm going to own some of this, but reframe it a bit. And if my headphones die on me quickly, I'm going to just switch to some other headphones. I hope you can still hear me.
So far, so good. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm hearing you. Yes, this is great. Good. So the new ones are working. So your characterization of the, he's really cross, bless him. I do love you, State President. Your characterization of the church in your narrative is deceptive and misleading. I would say it's not, and he absolutely refused to engage with the evidence, and he didn't answer my questions that would prove that my characterization of the church is not deceptive and is not misleading. He avoided engaging with the evidence, but that's his mantra. It's wrong. This church has been established by God to bring his children closer to Jesus Christ as they learn of him and follow his example and teachings. Our work is to uplift and edify, to bless lives, to care for others, and to teach the doctrine of Christ. And he'd put a quote in about, loving people and being gentle and kind and, no evil speaking, no clamor, be tender-hearted, be forgiving. Well, you could do that when you're not in an abusive relationship. But if you're dealing with a system that is openly wounding your family and your congregation and your loved ones, you can't be patient and kind with that. You have to fight it. There's a time for war. So he goes on. The war that you instigate and fight, I'm not starting this war. It's been going on since the pre-existence. And that you have vowed to continue to fight. Yes, because we all did when we became Christians. We are fighting evil. We are fighting Pharisees like Jesus did, even if they're the general authorities of your church, like Jesus did. And he was willing to die for that fight. That's why they killed him. They didn't kill him because he was tree hugging. They killed him because he was challenging their power. It's not compatible with these purposes. To bless lives, care for others, teach the doctrine of Christ is not compatible with fighting, he's saying. Therefore, the decision of the council is to withdraw your membership from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm going to kind of own the war bit. Yes, I'm talking about revolution and war. Yes, the leaders of the church are not going to like it because we're coming for them. because they have corrupted this church. They have appointed themselves without a vote of the people. They do not have authority. They have twisted the doctrines to teach Lucifer's plan of unconditional obedience to them. They've declared they're infallible. It is a sin for us to think or even speak of them as having even human weaknesses, according to a current member of the First Presidency, taught in General Conference, Henry B. Eyring, The Power of Sustaining Faith. They have done this to us. They've perpetuated a culture of judgment and expecting everyone to follow a one-size-fits-all based on their young adulthood in 1940s and 1950s Utah in America. And if we don't follow that pattern for our lives that worked out well for them, we are unworthy, we are not good enough, we should feel bad, and we need to get our act together and repent, because those are the only people going to their heaven. So, yeah, I'm going to fight that, because that's not the religion I grew up with. Bits of it were there. I'm not saying it was always functional, but that's not the religion I grew up with. The religion I grew up with was growing. It was increasingly inclusive. It had just decided to stop being institutionally racist. The religion I grew up with was outward looking, engaged with the world. President Hinckley, before he went totally homophobic, was about, we're not afraid of the world, we'll love the world, I'm going to talk to the press, I will be fearless, I'll put stuff out there, we are going to embrace the opportunities. A bit before he died, he gave an amazing fireside to the YSAs that I'll always remember, where he said, don't be apocalyptic that the end of the world is tomorrow. Don't do it. I lived through the Depression. He just shamed us all. He was like, you think you got problems in 1990s modern Europe? I was, when I was your age, it was the actual Great Depression in America, like starvation and poverty. And we're still here. So he said, prepare to have children and grandchildren, have a pension, plan for a long, happy life in the future. So he said, so don't be apocalyptic. Don't think the end is nigh. Don't live with that nihilism and negativity. Get out there and make the world better. But then he got succeeded by people who threw his legacy under bus, declared it was all the work of Satan. They gave a victory to Satan, and they are again, absolutely, the end of the world is tomorrow. These are the last days. Despair, everybody, despair. We're going to die on the hill, fighting the world for our homophobia, our religious freedom to hate the gays and oppose gay marriage, as Dallin Oakes has made very clear in his talks. And they're telling the youth, the young men's president spoke at the BYU Women's Conference, saying these are the young people, and President Nelson has said this too, who are going to usher in the millennium. They told that to us in the 1980s.
No, we're ushering in the millennium. Yeah, back off. That's our job. I want to just quickly then, as we're wrapping up.
Sorry, I'm just having headphone issues.
Just like that's okay. You do your thing just now.
Yeah, I'm back in. Yeah.
So we have, if you want to know more about what Peter has said, we have all of the episodes of Mormon Civil War podcast so far.
Yeah.
Enjoy working your way through. You're up to, I mean, we're saying you're up to episode 7, kind of belies how many episodes there are.
About 13 so far. Yeah. There'll be about 4 more.
Because you have like, for example, 5A, 5B, 5C.
Alana phoned me in a panic the other day, like, hold on, where are we? So that's where we're up to.
And this is hard to hear. What I'm saying is really tough, because I'm saying to all the Mormon people, this system and these leaders who you've projected your best self onto, you project onto them your Christianity, your Christian Mormonism. They're harmless. They're like granddads, and we can just trust them and bear testimony, and they will never lead the church astray. And all I'm saying is, well, they have, and it's about to destroy your ward. So are you going to wake up? Have a reality check. Look around you. Talk to your own children. Is where they're going to be something that your grandchildren will want to be a part of? Not if it's sexist, not if it's racist, not if it's homophobic, not if it's transphobic, not if it's judging people for having a body. No, it's not going to survive, and they won't want anything to do with it. So are you willing to do the hard work to change it and to demand that we return to common consent accountability? These leaders never again declare something to be the mind and will of God, or even a policy, without checking with us first, because that's what the scriptures, that's what God said we should do every time. It's what the Doctrine and Covenants manual teaches, that we should be consulted on every decision that will impact the saints.
Don't
That's
Community
in
of
the
Christ
current
do that?
manual. Yes, the Community of
something along
Christ
those
have,
lines?
yes, they have really pioneered ways to effectively do common consent and involve the membership in decision making. They've made some mistakes. I had a wonderful conversation with one of their British apostles, emeritus apostles now, who also has appeared on some of the Sunstone UK panels talking about this, where when they were, I think it was the decision to ordain women, they handled it very parliamentarian way, as he said. They had it quite aggressive debates, and it was very divisive, and they lost a lot of members over how that was handled. So they learned from that experience, and their next, their recent impetus to be LGBTQ inclusive, what they did is set up a long process of listening, of having people with different points of view speak, but not high stakes, not like you have to vote in 5 minutes, make a decision. Time spent listening to the different points of view, listening to the experience of LGBTQ members. And as a result, they got the vast majority of the membership on board. And there was a resounding vote in favour of that when the time came.
Now,
So we
said
can
a
learn
while
from
back,
that.
Peter, that when you were having discussions, you were talking about reasoning together.
Yeah.
It's in Isaiah. The
Yeah.
let us reason together. That it's beautifully put and exciting and revelatory. And I'm now irritated because Doug has said that they told his generation in the 1960s that they are the chosen generation. What is going on?
We are the chosen generation.
I don't know.
Is that not a song?
Yeah. And Doug's only a little bit older than me, bless him.
We need to have an Alana Sings episode. But what I wanted to do was to let everyone know that also there's a sort of a, maybe what would you call it, like a highlights episode where where you talk about some of the things that you have covered in your podcast with us. So there's a previous episode where we've got that. You spoke to our friend of the show and fellow Brit Venger, Nemo, on Sunday night about what, maybe some of the sort of more nuts and bolts of what happened this past week. So go check
that's
that
Nemo
out.
the Mormon in YouTube channel. Yep.
Pop a link in the show notes. Nemo's also doing great stuff with memes.
Fact checking.
Watching Nemo giggle is glorious. It's so he's so sweet,
and his beard gets better every week. It's coming along very well.
Beard. So that's all happening. Peter, you have more episodes.
So I've got about 3 more to do with the episode 6s, which is just, and they're really good stuff. What I'm doing is, I've already recorded most of them, is taking a deep dive into what the nuanced apologists are doing, what are their tactics, and unfortunately why it's not working. But I'm looking at the Givens, I'm looking at Patrick Mason, so I'm super excited for your interview with him. Looking at what Fair Mormon has tried, and the amazing and kind of debacle of the Radical Orthodoxy manifesto that a lot of them came up with together, that was kind of a bit of a mess. So I'm looking at the best of the rest. I'm like, what are the church's defenders, its best scholars, trying to do to save the church in the 21st century? And I'm taking a really thorough look, what's good about them, what isn't working, why won't these strategies work ultimately? And the conclusion each time ultimately is they think they've got all the time in the world and they don't. So unfortunately, that's not going to work. We have to have a more urgent strategy, but that is more confrontational. You can't bring about rapid change in a very fossilized organization in 5 years without being really assertive and quite blunt and saying insulting things about the leaders where it's needed to wake people up. but offering the evidence. I'm not just throwing out insult and say, yeah, let's get angry. I'm like, no, look at what they've said. And it's really thorough analysis in my podcast. This is the evidence. Here's the train journey of how that idea got embedded and then retaught, and why we're doing it now. But also how we can undo it. And I've got stuff about John A. Widtsoe, another hero like Hugh B. Brown, who taught a rational faith, not afraid of science, that is about progression and education. And then at the end of it, of those 6s, I'm going to do the bite model. Now, this is tough.
I was just talking about this to Jane the other day, saying, what is the bite model?
Yeah, so the bite model is a sort of very well thought through scholarly set of criteria for a cult, for a dangerous, harmful mind control cult. And it doesn't cover all the issue. I also look at several other criteria which it misses. But unfortunately, I don't know if it will really give the punchline away. We're doing nearly all of them, like with bells on. Unfortunately, we're not the worst mind control cult, but we're not the best either. And then just facing up to that reality, because I spent half my life saying, no, we're not a cult. No, we're not a cult. But unfortunately, although I don't think Mormons like to think of it, but by definition, what we have normalized in our leaders' rhetoric and our culture meets all of those criteria, and they are disturbing. And it's not made up. It's serious stuff.
Offensive to most people who are members of the church to say we're a cult, but
I guess it's because of how you think of as a cult, though. Like when I think of cult, I think, I've seen many programs over the years of, all the things, and it's so, I don't really know how to describe it, but, so when I look at my church, no, it's not a cult. We don't do all those things that they're doing.
Yeah.
But when you really sit down and look at, as you say, the mind control, the not thinking for yourself, all these different things.
Withholding information, uninformed consent,
so
all of it, leader worship, the whole lot. So I go into that because part of what I'm saying is we need to, if we're going to be willing to speak truth to power and rebel against our leaders in hopefully a healthy way, to return to what the scriptures say. I'm not talking about destroying the church here, just do it as it's meant to be. Then we're going to have to get upset enough. We're going to have to be worried about, we're going to have to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about ourselves and what we've ended up doing. Not intentionally. No one here is trying to be hurtful, but but listen to the church in exile. We hurt those people, and there's far more of them than there are of us still active. Far more. There's 8 of them for every one of us. And that's gonna, and a lot of them are the friends who used to sit next to you on the pew. So listen, we hurt them. Let's stop hurting them. We have to stop doing this. It's ridiculous. We can do better. We are better people than that. Let's be better. And then 7B will be all the rest of the great stuff. So I've released 7A a bit early. These are 10 big philosophies, big ideas in Mormonism that I think are awesome and make us unique, important, powerful, potentially a world religion. And then I've got about 20 for 7B. There's loads of great stuff about this religion. A lot of it that we're not making the most of, but we could. This is the potential we have as a 21st century religion that was made for the 21st century. We were built for this, and the leadership class that have taken over with their culture and their system have unfortunately taken us down completely the wrong path in far too many ways. And it's not working. Jesus said, by their fruits ye shall know them. What's the fruits? It's not the world's fault these kids are leaving. It's not the world's fault. The world has never been nicer ever in history, which Dieter Uchtdorf admitted. It's what we're doing to them.
Okay, Peter, our audience are not going to let us go.
No.
Okay, how about you take this question that Scott Brandon has just asked?
Does anyone have a good data on how many people have left the LDS Church in the UK? Yes, we do. So the wonderful gift we've been given, because this data is top secret. The leadership have always known it. We feed them all this data every week. But it's never released to us, which is tragic because it would really help us to target our efforts where it's needed. They've only just admitted that since the 1990s, globally, more than half of the adult members of the church have been single. They just said that in the last general conference. If we'd known that since the 90s, our rhetoric,
Independent.
our
Can we just
ministry would have
change
been
that word?
completely different.
Mhm. Yeah, we
But
don't
they hid
say
that from
single.
us.
We say independent. Thank you.
Oh,
very
yes, go for it. There you go.
much. Yes.
You don't need a man to
All the
validate
single
you.
ladies.
But
Yeah,
what? So
Peter
data
has the
control
info.
is part of this, cult system, basically. So brilliantly, so with significance, in 2010, Elder Teixeira, as the president of the Europe Area Presidency, issued a challenge to the church in Europe and Britain: double sacrament attendance in
That's
a
right.
decade. You've
Yep.
got 10 years to do this, and it seemed, is that all your
With
ambition
the
is?
little cards, like with those
Yes.
goals. So yeah.
With the goals. All we need to do, each of us, is reactivate
Yep.
or convert one person each in 10 years. I mean, it was insulting. It's such an easy task to fulfill. It just felt, really, this is all we're going to aim for? So what happened in 10 years? Well, we found out, because after 10 years, in 2020, someone leaked to our good buddy Chris Mace, who does the data on the finances of the church in Britain, the data for, I don't think but yeah, he's been public with that, so I'm not blowing a cover. The insider data for stake activity levels for the last 10 years. And so we have it, and it's on a Google Doc online that, we can send you the link to.
Yeah. Speak
And
to
it's
Peter.
fascinating
Oh, yeah.
reading. And overall, we've dropped 13%, but in individual stakes have been really hard hit. This is inactive membership in 10 years. My stake, Canterbury stake, and the neighbouring stake, Maidstone, around 25% loss of our active membership in the last 10 years. Birmingham stake's the worst, 40%. They've lost 40% of their active membership in 10 years. There are only 4 stakes in the UK and Ireland that have actually grown. There's a couple that got amalgamated with mission districts, but there's only 4 that actually had growth, and it's not by very much. One of them is Preston area, which is where the temple is, so people are retiring there in their old age. One is London, lots of people moving into London. But really, we are losing. And the headline statistic is we only have now 14.7% of our membership in the UK is actively attending church now. 14.7%. All the rest are less active less active. So we have the exact data, and lots of people discuss this. They fact check. Yes, that matches what's happening in all our areas. So this data is absolutely credible. Usually wards, sorry to get nerdy, usually wards have a sense of being around 21% active based on the ward lists. But what that doesn't count is the address unknown files. So the church's total for a nation includes the tens of thousands of people who are not on anyone's ward list because we've lost track of them. So they're in the address unknown file for the UK, So that gets added. So we are actually, based on our ward lists, it's 21% active on average. But when you factor in the address unknown people, it whacks right down, as it should, to about 14.7%. And the same data seems to be the same across Europe. I think it's actually worse in Latin America. There are something like, I've heard numbers of 2% active because they've done so much egregious baseball baptizing there. The corruption has been epic in trying to keep up this illusion that Latin America is becoming Mormon.
I was horrified when I heard about all the baseball baptisms when I listened to it in a podcast. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, seriously?
And I've got a second cousin who served in Portugal. They were doing it there in the 1980s. But beach baptisms, they take kids to the beach, baptize them in the sea, get their numbers for the week, send them home without their parents' permission. Just
Crazy.
outrageous.
Absolutely crazy.
Just so yes, we have the data. That's how bad it is. But the point I keep trying to make, it's starting to happen in Utah as well.
Yeah.
We all know people in Utah reporting many families each year leaving from their wards. Loads of the kids have stopped coming. They're starting to sell church buildings in Utah. People every so often will post online, oh, here's another chapel for sale. Scott Brandon is saying we have over 800 members in the ward and only around 120 people. And he was saying they baptize hardly anyone. All the drivers of growth have crashed. And the general authorities are panicking about this. They talk about it in conference. They're starting to guilt people for not having enough babies, even though there was kind of a truce years ago to stop.
What, so that we have more members of the church?
Yeah.
Not about considering that people are maybe not financially able to have more children, or
And
that maybe they
80%
don't
of them
want
leave
to have more
anyway.
children.
No. Dallin Oaks said in conference, he slipped in a little comment that it's Satan influencing young fertile couples to think that they should limit the number of their children. He said that in conference, and no one has said that for decades. There was a truce after the 80s because they used to condemn contraception at all. You know, you must not limit childbirth.
My mum said she wouldn't have had so many children, but it was something that a member told her. Now, this member, that's what they were taught. And that contraception wasn't a thing. And I'm like, seriously?
Evil. No, it's the prophets.
It was
evil. Yeah. Which shows how much we can change. Our church went for polygamy, which was a radical change in a short period of time, and then abandoned polygamy quite a bit reluctantly, but most in a short period of time. We went for institutional racism very quickly in 1852. We abandoned institutional racism overnight in at least as a practice, not a concept, in 1978. They went for the November policy. They abandoned the November policy. So where people say to me, Peter, you're saying we've got 5 years to make this change happen. It's too quick. We can't do that. And the members won't cope. You can't have LGBTQ inclusion in 5 years. I'm like, we've done it already. Yeah. We've radically changed our ideas about what an acceptable marriage is in quicker time than that. All you need, though, is a consensus of opinion, and or the prophets need to announce it. This is what we're doing now, and people will just cooperate. You know, that's the advantage of brainwashing everyone, is they'll do as they're told. They'll cope, but we have to persuade them.
Well, I always come back to the point that there is a lot, while we are talking about, you know, institutional changes and possibilities, there's a lot that could change tomorrow. There's a lot that could change immediately that we can do right now, either as individuals or when you get a really cool bishop. You know, so that is just worth pointing out, you know, that there is the...
So what can we do? We can talk about this. We can say, okay, let's be honest about these problems, but here are the solutions.
Exactly.
Let's offer that pathway. So if in the next few years, the state leaders stare into the abyss, and I said this to mine at the trial, as soon as possible, you need to stare into the abyss. You need to see the inevitable future coming very quickly. Your children are going to leave the church, and we're going to start closing these chapels in your state one by one. That's going to happen in the next few years. Are you willing to change? People need to get that shock. They need to realize this is real. It's already started happening. I'm not making it up. This is the data. We're down to 14.7% of our members active and falling in Britain. 80% of the kids already left. This has been going on for decades now. So I'm sorry I'm so repetitive with this, but you just think, why don't people notice, you know? But anyway, get that in people's heads. But then here's the game plan. To keep our young people, we have to do these things. Okay, we as grassroots have talked about this with each other. Peter did a podcast I listened to. The LDS Church in Exile online has been talking about this for years. You can watch as people have been commenting the Mormon stories about how people have been harmed and driven out of the church by not making these reforms. You get convinced so that as and when the leadership follow you, which they do, they're terrified of the members. They're always sending out these surveys now to find out what we think. So the quicker we can get grassroots members aware, informed, inspired that there's hope to stay and make it work rather than it's all rubbish, you need to leave, which is usually the narrative. So I'm saying this is hard. Let's own it all. Let's turn it into a positive and move forward. And here's what we can fix. It is doable. It's hard, but we can do it. We're Mormons. We are can-do people. We get stuck in. We have been taught Christian Mormonism as well as the Pharisee one. So let's hold on to that bit of our religion, because that's the true bit and the rest is rubbish and you know it in your heart of hearts. Let it go. And then, you know, that's what we can all do now. That's what we can begin that process.
We can get excited. This is why this space is so bloody brilliant, because
Yeah.
we start talking and the ideas start flowing, and before you know
Yeah.
it, we have
3
all
hours have gone. Sorry.
Almost 3.5.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Peter has more content still to come. You're
Yep.
going to be at Sunstone, right, this
Yep.
September?
So I'm presenting at Sunstone UK, which I think is going to go online as well. I think it's going to be a combo one.
Yeah.
So I haven't quite decided what I'm doing, but it'd be along these lines. Here's the package to save the church. Here's looking forward. What we've. I did a similar presentation a couple of years ago, but this one will be, I'll refine it a bit and update it. Here's a game plan for what could actually work and what it will take. Something along those lines, probably. I'm thinking I want to do TikToks. I've been convinced. I want to, because I'm so waffly. I'm like, no, let's get the key points out in TikTok. They'll allow 3 minutes. I can't do 1 minute, obviously, but 3 minutes I could work on. I started writing one. It's about half an hour long. I have to edit it down. But I want to do that.
On TikTok. I did not get TikTok. I
was just about to say that.
No.
Jim's like, I don't get TikTok. Why do you watch it?
No, it's really
because it's really amazing, and now she's addicted.
Yeah,
she's even putting up more TikToks than me.
Yeah, it's fun. If you want to watch videos of my husband snoring while I try not to smother him in his sleep, come find me personally on TikTok, not just the Saints page.
And loads of people have asked me to write a book, so I'm going to take that on. I'm going to, once I finish these podcasts, I want to get it into a book form if I can. There's a lot to do.
Peter, are you trying to get money from talking about the church? For goodness sake.
I've been very good. Give money to Nemo, but I've not monetized yet. And
I'm only joking.
I
heard a comment like that. Like, you're just trying to make money from talking about the church and blah blah blah.
Let's get rich.
Let me just
well, we're poor because you took all our money, Mormon Church.
Let me just speak to that for a little second. There are lots of faithful members of the church, leadership in the church, who do books, who do podcasts, who are paid for speaking engagements. And if you have a look, there's a little app called, now what is it called? My something around
My expensive general authority.
My Turtle House. My Turtle House, where you can hear speakers who you can who you can pay for content from the church. So people who might be willing to throw around the priestcraft card.
I was just trying to say, they said that about John Dehlin, did they not?
They did, but we have to just keep in mind there are lots of Latter-day.
How much have we both learned about how long it takes to do a podcast? I mean, John Dehlin, I don't know how he earns every cent that he's getting. I mean, it's incredible the output he accomplishes, and it takes time to do this. And for him to stay so kind still. Absolutely. So, he'll have his little rant every so often, caffeinated John Dehlin. But I think we owe such a gift to him, that the reason the Church in Exile is a compassionate, thoughtful place is in very large part down to John Dehlin, because he has always been at pains not to get nasty with it. And my gosh, the defenders of the church have become incredibly nasty. I'm obviously pushing it a bit by being cheeky. I appreciate that you realise it's being
British.
Cheeky, not nasty. We're British, this is being friendly. Exactly. But which is a thing for real. But just the fact that he has a sort of one of the larger voices in all of this, his emphasis throughout has been being fair, being kind, being compassionate, and letting people tell their own story. I think that has just created a baseline vibe for the Bloganacle that is staggeringly nicer than it would have been without him and his influence, because there is so much pain there. It is very easy to just spend all your time livid. I do, but I spend a lot of time extremely livid. But he and that attitude of thoughtful, patient kindness and reasonableness, I think has been a huge gift to the whole community. Absolutely. And it's set a tone that has enabled us to be safe in this space as active Latter-day Saints, to still be in those places with them. And I'm so grateful for that, and hope we can. And as for the podcast, I can't, because Lynn will kill me if I keep doing this. I can't keep writing it long essays. Don't worry, there is an end game here. I'm not going to do them ad infinitum. I might do the occasional one, but what I quite like to do is actually start interviewing people too. You know, I've had so many super interesting people reach out to me in response to the podcast, and I've started asking some of them if they'd be up for an interview. So I've, you know, there's some recently returned missionaries. I want to have a great discussion. How can we make the missionary program better? And it's all going to be about how to make it better now. You know, what is the solution? What are the problems in this area? How can we make it better? Nemo and I are going to coordinate with an Australian QC who's a Latter-day Saint. We're going to talk about the experience of the American exceptionalism. They're constantly going about America being the be-all and their constitution, and how actually, you know, it's quite different. And he gets angry about that because he's a legal expert from Australia. And other people have good constitutions too, you know. So we've got great things in the offing. We've got stuff in the pipeline.
And I think, you know, that pragmatic approach from you and Nemo is really, it's one that you know, it's so refreshing to be able to, you know, it's ideas driven, and it's, you know, it's brilliant. If people want to find out how to get listen at Sunstone, how to participate at Sunstone UK, if they want to join in the great discussion that happens on the Sunstone UK Facebook page, just come and, you know, find
it's a public page, come along.
Find us there. Daisy's getting very tired, so we're gonna get ready to say our good night.
You've been wonderful. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, our girl is doing amazing. Can I just ask Peter, I'm going to hand over for Alana to take us out, but before she does, can I ask, what are you going to do for self-care now that you've been through, you know, pretty big spiritual trauma here? What are you going to do to look after yourself?
I'm going to channel my energy into proactive reform. That's the best kind ever. Do something with the pain and make it better. Which I've been doing long. I've got a New York cheesecake in the fridge that I think I just finished, so that's all good. I watch Handmaid's Tale every week. I'm mostly being beaten by Lynn playing Sequence, which is a fantastic board game. Yeah, it's all good, and I'm doing a lot of digging in the garden while listening to podcasts. So, and Patrick Mason's amazing book.
Podcasts are taking over my life, seriously. Like, I never thought I would see that.
I know. I've hardly watched telly now.
Patrick Mason with the
Patrick Mason, this incredible. I mean, he's one of the greatest minds in Mormonism. I mean, there's no way he'll come on your show, ladies. It's, you know,
on our show in a couple of weeks, you say. Oh, and what's that? We also have his book running as a giveaway on our Facebook page. I might check that out.
Are you being boastful, Jane Christie?
I am, because it's Patrick Mason, people.
He's great. As I said to you, I've described. I haven't released the episode yet, but I'm describing as a Care Bear with balls of steel. he's just like this lovely, cuddly guy, but he's you know, his analysis is tough. It is fair. He's spot on. I have so much respect for him. My only criticism is that he's not clocked that the church won't be here in 20 years in his country, and it won't be here in 10 years in ours. And that is a significant difference, because ultimately everything he's suggesting cannot be dealt with the way he's suggesting dealing with it. It has to be faster. It has to be more assertive. But his analysis is spot on, in my opinion. I cannot recommend him more. Just an amazing guy, and he's done some great interviews around the book. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's going to say to you. Yeah,
we're going to have fun, and I'm sure you're going to come back and chat with us again, right? Because your analysis and commentary is so good and refreshing. Alana, will I hand over to you and Daisy to take us out? Does Daisy want to say her good nights?
Do you want to say good night to everyone? Say good night.
Good night, Daisy.
Good night. We love you, Daisy.
Good night.
Thank you for lending us your mum.
Yeah. So I obviously been thinking, and I'm sure I possibly speak for Jane as well, just thinking along the lines of how different would it be to be able to go to church, and Daisy's just knocking my microphone down, sorry. To go to a church where we would be able to disagree. We would be able to talk about difficult things, challenge things, you know, how different would that look for people? Because that's as I say, what's been missing for me is not being able to say, well, and obviously it's only the last few months I've started really finding out a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff about the church. But there's times where things have been said that I've wanted to say, no, wait a minute, this isn't right, but I haven't been able to. So how different would a church look for people, like, to just be able to do all of that? You know, I could say, could that be a positive thing? You know, whereas it's not seen as a positive thing. And I just want to finish up again by saying thank you very much to all our listeners. I know it's been a long 3.5 hours. I'm so sorry. Typical child.
If you want to give us a follow on our YouTube page to subscribe to our content, you'll get little reminders to tell you when we're going live. Also our Facebook page. What else have we got? We've got Instagram, we've got TikTok.
Yep. And I just want to finish up again by saying, Peter, you really truly are amazing. We truly love you, and I'm sure I speak for so many people to just say thank you for being that voice for others who maybe feel they don't or can't have their voice. I'm sure I'm actually getting emotional here. Like, what is wrong with me? Like, because there are, like, I'm one of those people who just feels I don't have a voice, even in the world, not even in church. I just feel like sometimes we just can't always get the chance to say what we feel. So I thank you on behalf of probably thousands and millions of people. And again, I just want to say again, you know, we stand with you, we support you.
Thank you.
I guess what's coming to my mind is I bless you with peace, you know, that you can find that peace even through a time that most people don't maybe have that. And I think you've handled it so well, Peter. Like, I often think of myself and how different I would be. Like, I would be, you know, just, you know, but you've handled it so well. But I still want to bless you and Lynn with that peace throughout your life and going forward. I hope that finally one day that they'll listen. You know, we can't all be wrong. We can't all be wrong,
No,
can we?
no.
And again, what Jane and I love to say is just bless your journey.
Thank you. I really appreciate
thank you
that.
so,
thank
so
you.
much.
And I just want to thank everyone who's supported the podcast, everyone who's taught me. You know, it's not about me. Over and over again, I just want to keep emphasizing that what I'm saying is just what I've heard from lots of other people. You know, it's just challenging what they're saying and what they can say. If you talk to them, go find them. They're in Facebook, they're in social media. Wonderful people. The LDS Church in Exile. Let's learn from them. Let's be blessed by the wisdom they can give back to us, and it might be enough to save us. You know, because we're on the sinking ship. They're already in some of the lifeboats. So if we're going to get our ship afloat again, we're going to need their help. And that is why I do this, because it is speaking for a lot of people, and they're saying so. And I'm so grateful for that. And all the people who wrote to my stake president for the trial saying the same thing again. You know, it's really very moving and empowering and validating and exciting. It's fun. You know, John Widsoe, I think, said, you know, it's fun to be involved in this fight, in this struggle. It's, you know, let's be cheerful about it. It's a hoot. You guys have made it loads of fun. Thank you, you know, for what you're doing and bringing your experience and wisdom and character and everything to things. You know, this is what I hope the Brits can offer. We've got a great sense of humor. We don't suffer fools gladly. We'll tell it how it is. We have a really important perspective to offer the American church, that apart from screaming at them that we're about to die and they do need to rescue us, like, start caring about your children, care about these people around the world that you invested your missions in building our communities and giving us this religion. take responsibility for it, please, because the fruits of what you're doing is that we're disappearing now. And the other thing is to so Lynn's going at me, hurry up, I can't think, go away, go away. I know the child needs to go to sleep. I've just lost my train. This was great, it was going so well, darling. Oh yeah, the hope. But the hope is, we have watched the Church of England, a state religion that controlled politics and law and society and religion, just like the Mormon Church does in Utah, disappear. No one cares what its leaders think because there aren't any of them left. Having small numbers and being a big influence is not a thing. You have to have the numbers. They prioritize their not upsetting their elderly members, so their young people left, and now they're closing church after church after church. That is what is now happening to us. While the rest of Britain lost its religion throughout the 20th century, it's only just started happening in America. The LDS church grew. We grew exponentially. We grew and we grew and we grew because we were hoovering up the people leaving the other churches because we were offering something better. And we've stopped offering what we had then. We've stopped being a joyful, positive, interesting, exciting church with big ideas. We've become a tiny-minded, petty, judgmental, funless religion that is mainly listening to general authorities quoting each other and demanding to be worshipped as infallible. I mean, come on, we can do better. So the fact that you are now having your crash to secularism in America is no reason for Mormonism to follow suit, because we didn't here in Britain. We grew while all the Christian churches around us died. Because we got something special, we've got something unique, we've got something amazing, and we need to get that back and own it and love it and be distinctive, because just copying the evangelical far right American Christians is not worked. It's been a disaster. We are better than that. Stop exporting that nonsense to us, please. We'd like to survive. You know, we can show you how.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks everyone, and we will catch you in the next episode then. Have a good night, and thank you for staying with us.
Thank you, ladies. You've been
Peter.
brilliant. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.